Chapter 1031. Dean held Brank in his hand as he left the manor. He followed the direction that the black mage had escaped to. They jumped over the roofs of the buildings on the street as if they were a group of assassins and thieves wandering on the edge of gray. After a moment, Dean met the black mage on a building at the edge of the square. He had been caught, and one of his arms was cut off. His whole body was bathed in blood. It seemed that he had experienced a fierce battle. The one holding the black mage was a handsome young man with a golden spear. There were 4 guards beside him, all of whom had already released their demonic forms. At this moment, they were leading the black mage back the way they came, ready to hand him over to Bowling to deal with. The handsome youth and the others were stunned when they saw Dean and Brank. They didn't expect to see their master here. The black mage, who was pretending to be in pain, stopped when he saw Dean holding Brank. His eyes were stained with sticky blood. His face was full of surprise. He didn't expect that Dean would succeed. Moreover, they found him so quickly. In this way, he was saved from the pain of being escorted back to be interrogated. Master, the handsome youth looked at Brank, who had a gloomy face. He saw the 5 people behind Brank and saw that they were carrying the lightning filter. He couldn't help but widen his eyes. They soon understood that they had fallen into the enemy's trap. "How dare you betray the master?" The handsome youth shouted at the 5 people who were carrying the lightning filter. The 5 people's mouths twitched, but they didn't answer. Brank sighed. "You guys let him go." Dean smiled. "Smart. You know what I'm going to say." Brank didn't feel happy when he was praised by Dean. Instead, he felt insulted. The handsome youth and the 4 people's faces slightly changed. The handsome youth immediately said, "Master, this person is his accomplice. We can't let him go so easily." Then he shouted at Dudian, "You let go of my master and I'll let him go. 1 for 1. Dudian smiled. "Do you think his life can be compared with your master's?" The handsome youth sneered. "Since you have found him, it's hard to say whether he's worth the exchange or not." "Really?" Dean looked at Brank. "Your slaves don't seem to care about your life and death. In that case, let them open their eyes. For example, like this." His palm turned and Brank's arm was twisted to 180 degrees. "Kacha! Kacha!" The sound of bones breaking echoed. Brank screamed in pain, cold sweat dripping down his forehead. "Quick, let him go." The handsome youth's face changed. He was shocked. He didn't expect Dean to be so unscrupulous and not afraid to anger him. He wanted to use Dean to torture the hostage face to face and tear off Dean's indifferent mask, but he didn't dare to gamble. Moreover, the chip was his master who had saved his life. "Get lost." The handsome youth clenched his teeth and coldly pushed the black mage out. He believed that even if the black mage returned to Dean's side, he would still hold a grudge for today's matter. There would be a gap between the 2 of them. The black mage was relieved and quickly trotted in front of Dean. His heart was filled with resentment towards the handsome youth. He was afraid that the latter's attitude would be tough. He felt that Dean would really abandon him. After all, his weight couldn't be compared to Brank's. Fortunately, Brank was afraid of death, so he admitted defeat. Otherwise, he would be in real danger today. "Let them get out of here," Dean said to Brank. Brank slightly gritted his teeth as he endured the pain and humiliation. "You go back first." "Master." The handsome youth couldn't help but call out. "Be obedient." Brank's voice was a bit heavier. The handsome youth slightly gritted his teeth and finally led the 4 guards to retreat. "If I find out that you are secretly following me, I won't lose my life, but I won't live a comfortable life." Dean carried Brank as he passed by them. The handsome youth's eyebrows were raised as he looked at Dean's back. He clenched his fists. "Can you walk by yourself?" Dean looked at the black sorcerer who was limping in front of him after he got rid of the handsome youth and others. The black mage slightly grinned. There was a bit of pain on his face. "It's okay. Fortunately, you came in time. Otherwise, I would have been killed by those bastards." Dean nodded slightly. "Since it's okay, you're responsible for carrying the thunder filter. Is there any problem?" The black mage was stunned. He slightly opened his mouth and looked at him. Dean didn't seem to be deliberately joking. He looked at the 5 guards carrying the thunder filter and suddenly realized, "It will be a bit difficult for me to carry it by myself." "Then leave one to help you." Dean quickly made a decision and said to Brank, Let 4 of them go, and 1 will follow. Brank's face slightly changed. It's impossible. What if you go back on your words after taking away the filter? Either you release me with them and leave with the filter, or they have to follow. You're not qualified to talk about conditions, Dean coldly said. Brank stared at him and suddenly took a deep breath. Really? Don't forget that the filter is in the hands of my people. Your purpose is the thunder filter, right? If something happens to me, my men will smash this lightning filter into pieces. You won't get anything then. Dean's eyes flashed slightly. He didn't expect him to think of this. Being able to become a member of the Wizard Council was really not a simple character. His expression was still indifferent. The destructive thunder filter is not good for anyone. If I'm going to die, then why would I care about it? Brank's expression was very straightforward. He knew that Dean cared about the thunder filter. Even if Dean deliberately tried to hide it, he would be able to see through it. After all, he had been a member of Parliament for many years. This was his bargaining chip, and even the hope of a comeback. Everyone takes what they need. You need the thunder filter. I just want to save my life. You want to take me hostage so that you can leave safely. I can assure you that I won't pursue you. But you have to promise me that you won't disturb me and my family in the future. Dean quietly looked at him for a moment. All right, let your people put the lightning filter next to you. Then I'll release you. Brank frowned. What if you don't release me after you remove the filter? It's very simple. The thunder filter is such a big object. It will take 2 people to carry it away. How will I carry the filter if I take you? Dean indifferently said. Brank frowned. He pondered for a moment, but eventually agreed. The 5 guards immediately placed the lightning filter on a stable open space. Dudeen asked the black mage to look after the filter. Then he brought Brank to the front of the 5 guards. I always keep my word. Let's go. Brank heaved a sigh of relief. The next moment, he suddenly felt a chill on his back, and a tearing pain came from his chest. He lowered his head and saw a sharp blade piercing through his chest, right where his heart was. You. Brank's eyes were full of panic and despair. Dean pulled out the lightning-splitting blade and pushed Brank towards the 5 guards. His body was covered in flames. A special blood-colored bone appeared on his forehead. The sun shined down from the sky. Die. Dean's eyes were cold. His blood-colored bone shot out a few rays of light. The 5 guards were stunned by the sudden turn of events. When Brank's corpse was pushed in front of them, they rushed forward to catch it in a hurry, hoping that Brank was still alive and could be resuscitated. But they found that Brank was completely dead. At the same time, some of them reacted quickly. They were ready to attack Dean, but Dean had already entered the demonic body state. The rays of light from the blood-colored bone on his forehead pierced through the 5 guards' foreheads. Dean felt that his heart was beating a little fiercely, and he even felt a trace of pain. He gasped and his face was pale. He put away the flames on his body, quickly turned around and flew to the front of the thunder filter. He said in a hoarse voice, "Let's go." The black mage was scared by Dean's attack. He clearly saw that the 5 guards were killed in an instant. All of their heads were pierced through. That was 5 dominators. The black mage was shocked when he heard Dean's hoarse voice. His heart was pounding. Was this the fighting power of the Abyss level? No. Even in the Abyss, it should be a very strong existence, right? He thought in his heart. His hands moved quickly to help Dean move the thunder filter. Holding the filter, the 2 rushed forward and left the place in the blink of an eye. It didn't take long for the 2 to rush out of the main city of Nile territory. The patrolling guards on the city wall desperately chased after them, but they were soon left behind by their speed. The 2 kept running forward and stopped after more than an hour. They came to a wilderness near the giant wall. There were low-level mutant beasts everywhere. Their genes were mutated by radiation. Their hair was rotten, and their bodies were oozing pus. The black mage gasped for breath. After putting the thunder filter on the ground, he didn't care about his image. He sat on the ground. One of his arms was cut off. He only had one arm to hold the thunder filter. It was even more strenuous. Huff, huff. Why didn't you agree with him? If we took the thunder filter, they would leave obediently. They wouldn't dare to offend us, so we wouldn't have to suffer. I guess the Lord of Nile has been alarmed. We are definitely wanted criminals in his territory. the black mage said while gasping for breath. Dean sat next to him. His chest was slightly heaving up and down. There was some sweat sliding down his cheeks. He wiped it and said in a bad mood, "Of course it would be the best. But how could Bronco be willing to let us take the Thunder Filter? Once I release him, all he has to do is coordinate with his 5 guards to attack the Thunder Filter, and we will have no choice but to protect the Thunder Filter. At that time, the initiative will be in their hands. Once we are in a stalemate, the other guards and the Lord of Nile will arrive, and even more powerful figures will be alerted. Our plan will fall short of success, and we will also be exposed." The black mage was stunned. After listening to Dean's words, he realized that it was indeed a very dangerous thing. It was difficult to guarantee that Bronco wouldn't go crazy and attack the Thunder Filter to pin him down. "You are very thoughtful." The black mage took a deep breath and said with a trace of admiration. The more contact he had with Dean, in addition to the initial fear and anger, he now had more admiration and awe for Dean. Dean made him deeply understand what it meant by the younger generation will surpass the older. Strong fighting power wasn't terrible. What was terrible was the mind and the ruthlessness. At this time, Dean's breathing gradually stabilized. He stood up and took off his black robe, including his boots. Then a magical flame appeared between his palms. It looked very magical. Like a magician, he burned the black robe and boots in his hands. Then he looked at the black mage and said, "Take off your clothes and eliminate the smell. Get ready to go." The black mage saw Dean's magical flame ability. He couldn't help but think of the scene where Dean shot down the 5 rulers in one breath. His eyelids twitched slightly. It was the first time he had seen such a magical ability. He had never heard of it before. Suddenly, his heart shivered. Dean noticed the change in the black mage's eyes. He said indifferently, "It seems that you have guessed it." The black mage was stunned. "What? My identity?" Dean looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. The black mage's whole body was covered in cold sweat, but his face changed from a dazed to a confused one. "What identity? You don't need to act. Your body has made an honest response." Dean smiled. "Since you have guessed it, then you should know that I can do anything here." The black mage reluctantly smiled. "Elder, you must be joking. Let's go." Dean grabbed the lightning filter and stretched out the split wing on his back. He carried the lightning filter on his back and flew forward. The black mage looked at Dean's back and quickly followed. His heart was filled with other thoughts. The more he thought about it, the more his blood surged. That night, there was a small town on the outer edge of the Phoenix Lord. The town wasn't big. There were only 3 or 4 rich families in it. They had a huge manor. The land in the town was cheap, so several families had built their manors. In terms of land area, they were not inferior to the Bourne family in the Phoenix Lord city. At this moment, in one of the manors, the dim yellow light illuminated the wallpapered hall, making it look somewhat old. A few servants, as well as a few well-dressed women and young men, cowered in the corner of the hall, shivering. The black mage sat on the sofa and let a young maid peel an apple for him. The maid's hand that was holding the knife kept shaking. The apple was almost peeled to the core. "Stupid girl, you're courting death." The black mage was very thirsty. He looked at the apple that was peeled to the size of an orange. He couldn't help but roll his eyes. He raised his hand and was ready to slap the maid. If he really got it, with the maid's physique, her entire jaw would probably be dislocated. Chapter 1032. The Dark Wizard's raised hand paused. He turned around and chuckled. "I was just joking with her. I won't go so far as to bicker with a lowly servant girl. Hitting her would only dirty my hands." The maid shivered in fear, and her face turned pale. "Okay, we have to stay in this town for a few days. Don't go too far." Dean was too lazy to waste his time arguing with the black mage. He concentrated on studying the Thunder Filter. The black mage smiled and nodded. When he turned his face, the corner of his mouth was slightly curled. He thought, "How much better can you be than me? You are a homicidal maniac." He was too lazy to argue with the stupid maid. Although he was dissatisfied with Dean's tone and attitude, he felt that there was some truth in his words. It was indeed ungentlemanly to casually attack the weak. Of course, it was different if he had a purpose. Dean turned on the thunder filter. The flickering electric current sprang out from the metal ring, flashing and jumping. It connected with each other to form a network, making the huge metal ring look like the border of the thunder mirror. He bit off a piece of his nail and threw it into the electric current. The hard nail was hit by the electric current. It floated in the electric net, rolled a few times, and turned into ashes, disappearing. Dean immediately looked at the observation mirror. He saw some light yellow particles appear in the mirror. He adjusted the magnification from 200 times to 500 times. The light yellow particles gradually expanded. These tiny particles contained countless small dots. There were cracks on the surface of these dots, like the lines of a human palm. He continued to magnify the magnification from 500 times to 1,000 times, and then 1,500 times. The small particles continued to expand and contain new tiny particles. It was very magical. Dean couldn't remember how many times he had adjusted the magnification. When the magnification button next to him reached the bottom, he saw a magical scene in the observation mirror. It was like looking at the Earth from the starry sky. It was a luminous light yellow ball, like a planet suspended in the starry sky, but it did not rotate. Outside it, there were 4 groups of light of different colors rotating, like the moon orbiting the Earth. These 4 groups of small balls were red, blue, gold, and white. The orbit was constant, and the magnetic field between them was very stable. When the magnification was slightly reduced, one could see that these 4 balls of light were surrounding the sphere, and their surface was enveloped by an almost transparent membrane that enveloped them. If one had to use a word to describe it, it would be the universe and the starry sky. Dean was stunned by the spectacle. He almost suspected that there was something wrong with the instrument if he didn't see the beautiful scenery step by step. It was hard for him to believe that this was the smallest landscape in his fingernail. Of course, it was possible that what the thunder filter saw might not be the smallest. After a long time, Dean slowly retracted the magnification and saw the original light yellow particles. He chose to reset the filter, and the scene in the observation mirror was quickly cleared, leaving only darkness. Dean thought for a moment. He used his fingernails to dig out a bit of fruit from the table and threw it into the lightning net. The fruit was quickly crushed. Dean looked through the mirror and saw a bubble-like ball. It was the nutrient content of the fruit. He kept zooming in and finally saw a connected ball of different colors. It seems that I have to try to know what I'm seeing, Dean murmured to himself. He called the black mage who was resting next to him and asked him to help move the thunder filter to the main room. Then he cleaned out the bookcases and desks in the main room and stuffed them into the bedroom next to the main room. He wanted to make room in the hall so that people wouldn't notice the abnormality here. I'll leave these people to you. Don't leak the news, Dean told the black mage. The black mage smiled and said, "Leave it to me." Dean closed the door and studied the thunder filter in the main room. After a few days, Dean had completely mastered the thunder filter after trying a variety of different samples. During this period, he had decomposed the samples including paper, tables, plastic shells of lamps, blankets, animal skins, and so on. He even found the blood of the black mage, the other maids in the manor, the owner of the manor and his children's blood, flesh, and so on. Through the observation of the thunder filter, Dean found an amazing phenomenon. His own blood composition was completely different from other people's blood composition. When his blood was expanded to the extreme, the scene he saw was almost the same as the scene he saw on the first day when he decomposed the nails. A big ball was surrounded by 4 small balls, like satellites orbiting in an unchanging orbit. The 4 small balls were also red, blue, gold, and white in color. But the ball around them had changed from light yellow to blood red. It was probably because this sample was taken from blood. Dean tested the blood of different parts of the body. He also tried his hair and found that there were 4 small spheres surrounding it. But the spheres that were surrounded by the 4 spheres had turned black. When it was shrunk, the big sphere and the 4 smaller spheres were all wrapped by a translucent membrane. They looked like a whole sphere, and blurry traces of 4 colors could be seen from the outside of the membrane. However, when it was shrunk even further, This membrane ball was surrounded by countless membrane balls, and on the outside of all the membrane balls, there was actually another membrane that enveloped all the membrane balls inside. And as it continued to shrink, the large membrane ball that enveloped the countless membrane balls was also enveloped by an even larger membrane. His blood and flesh samples were all the same, and he even intended to dissect his bones to observe. Logically speaking, different parts of his body should have different compositions. However, his body could no longer be measured by the body of a normal human. After all, his body had been implanted with magic marks and had been deeply transformed by them. In addition, he had also been experimented on by Crimson Moon. In a sense, he was no longer human. Comparing his own situation, Dean found that the final landscape of the Black Mage's blood was similar to the final landscape of the blood of the maids in the manor. The Black Mage's blood was two balls of the same size around each other, like a yin and yang fish. But the two balls were surrounded by a shining ring of stars. The maids were also two balls of the same size, but there was no ring around them. I don't know how to define this for humans. Is it a cell or a gene? Or something deeper or something else? Dean had a toothache. This was his biggest headache. There was no basis for measurement. Although he could observe the smallest composition of the material, he did not know what it represented or how to define it. Time flew by. Dean stayed in the manor for a month. During this month, many people from the town came to the manor to find the family, but they were all sent away by the manor owner. Among them, there were also his men who came to report the income and expenditure of the financial report, but they were also pushed back. With the Black Mage beside him, the family did not dare to move in the slightest. They did not even have the opportunity to sneak a glance at Dean. Dean was bored in the main room. He had changed from the initial use of the lightning filter to observe the material to the combination of different materials. Then he used the lightning filter to observe the changes of these materials, so as to infer the general characteristics. As the observation deepened, he found something incredible. He felt that the final landscape seen by the lightning filter was not the real final landscape of his body. There should be a more wonderful landscape inside the big ball. However, it was impossible to see it with the lightning filter. In addition, by comparing the genes of the masters like the Black Mage and the ordinary humans like the maids in the manor, he found that his body had many characteristics that their bodies did not have. First of all, the healing ability was fast. In the case of the most basic structure of the magnetic field, even if his body was cut open, it would quickly heal. The strong magnetic field would quickly gather the separated materials and restore them. Under the same experiment, the Black Mage's healing ability was significantly weaker. He only needed more than a minute to recover, but the Black Mage needed nearly half an hour, and the maids needed a day or even 2 days. In addition, Dean also found that when other materials were mixed into his blood, the final landscape was that the big ball around the big ball was still maintaining a constant trajectory. When other materials invaded and encountered the big ball, they were immediately destroyed and smashed like hitting a train. The broken fragments were integrated into the big ball. But strangely, the big ball did not grow in size after absorbing other materials, and there was no change. When he kept mixing other materials, after a certain amount, he found that there seemed to be a faint shadow of a star ring on the big ball around the big ball, especially when he mixed in the blood of the parasitic soul worm. The final landscape of the parasitic soul worm's blood was not two balls like the human blood, but a sharp blue awl, like an icicle. When the icicle approached the big ball and the big ball, it was immediately smashed by the four-color ball along the trajectory. After the broken icicle fragments were absorbed into the big ball, the shadow of the star ring around the four-color ball on the surface became more clear. After repeated attempts, Dean finally made two amazing discoveries. The first was that the big ball in the final landscape, formed by his body, was attractive. He discovered that every time he smashed something, it would be sucked over instead of falling naturally. It didn't disperse either. This sphere had a devouring nature, like a tiny black hole in a human body. And in every drop of blood in his body, there were countless of such tiny black holes. In addition to the devouring nature, he also found that the blood of the parasitic soul worm could promote the birth of the mysterious star ring. However, when he experimented with the black mage's blood, he found something different. When the two balls and the star ring outside the black mage's body hit the icicle of the parasitic soulworm, they were both injured. The icicle was broken, and the star ring and the two balls were also broken. They separated from each other and did not attract each other. There seemed to be some kind of repulsion between them. It seems that my body is still very different from ordinary people. I don't know if the abyss is like this, or if it's because I have the origami gene in my body. Dean was thoughtful. Through these days of experiments, he opened his eyes, and repeated experiments also made him have an incredible conjecture, which was his own potential. After repeated experiments, he found that the star ring outside the final landscape seemed to be the power of the magic mark. After repeated arguments, he was basically convinced of this point. The black mage only had one star ring, which meant that he only had one kind of magic mark. His final landscape was a big ball and 4 small balls of different colors. After absorbing the blood of the parasitic soulworm, a star ring appeared outside the 4 small balls. For every kind of parasitic soulworm that was absorbed, a star ring appeared outside the small ball. For this reason, he had to let the black mage go back and forth from the town, sneak into the black shop in the city, and buy a lot of different low-level parasitic soulworms. Fortunately, he only used it for experiments, so his requirements were not high. He did not need rare or legendary level parasitic soulworms. Even ordinary parasitic soulworms would be fine. It was not difficult for the black mage to buy them, and he could even buy them in batches. After absorbing 4 different parasitic soulworms, the 4 balls were surrounded by star rings. When Dean continued to try the 5th kind, he was shocked to find that one of the 4 balls had a star ring. The 2 star rings circled around it, looking even more gorgeous. Duddian found that there was no limit to the number of star rings that could be added to the 4-color ball. After adding more than 30 different kinds of parasitic soulworms, the number of star rings was still increasing. There were as many as 8 or 9 star rings on each of the 4 balls, almost covering the original light of the 4 balls. This was only a part of the blood experiment, but the experiment was successful. Dean could not help but think that his body could also be like this. Unlimited absorption, unlimited evolution. This idea was a bit bold, even appalling, but the experiment in front of him made Dean think so. The result was too shocking, and at the same time, it brought great excitement. If it was really possible, he could not imagine what kind of terrible power a person who could absorb 2, 3, 4, or even more magic marks would have. If it is successful, maybe I will really be a god. Dean thought of Crimson Moon's pursuit. Could it be that her experiment was successful on him? If that was the case, wouldn't his body already be considered the body of a god? In any case, Dean felt that it was necessary to give it a try. Anyway, his current situation could not be worse. Moreover, the repeated experiments with the thunder filter for more than a month had increased his confidence a lot. A week later, Dean left the town with the black mage and moved the thunder filter away. After finding a cheap house in a remote place, Dean contacted Barton and the others and asked them to watch over the thunder filter. Barton and the others had gradually mixed into various circles on the giant wall of Palga. Many of them had a legitimate identity, but there was still a small number of people who had not been registered yet, and they could help him watch over the thunder filter. Chapter 1033. The legendary monster ranking is easy. I'll give you a monster encyclopedia of the Monster Research Institute. However, there are places that sell legendary parasitic soulworms, but with our funds, even if we sell them, I don't think we can compete with others. The black mage was about to drink the coffee, but slowly put it back on the table after hearing Dean's words. Dean glanced at him. How did you get the legendary parasitic soulworm? The black mage smiled. I bought it with the money I saved over the years. Since I became the master, I invested all my funds into the experiment. I don't have much savings. It's not that I'm reluctant to give it to you. Even a born family's is not enough. Dean narrowed his eyes. The black mage hesitated. It's enough. But the born family's assets are fixed assets. If we want to liquidate them as soon as possible, it will be too much of a loss. Moreover, the Bourne family is a big family. If we suddenly sell a lot of their assets, it will certainly attract the attention of other families. If they investigate us, then we will be exposed. Is this the reason why you didn't make a move on the Bourne family? Dean thought for a moment and got up. Let me see the illustrated book of monsters first. The Black Mage quickly got up and followed. After returning to the hotel, the Black Magician went to the nearby Magic Research Institute to buy an illustrated handbook of the monsters. The illustrated handbook looked like a magazine, but the paper was smooth. It was a high-quality coated paper. The surface of the handbook was equipped with a color picture taken by a camera. It wasn't like the sketches in Sylvia's giant wall. The first thing that caught his eye was the list of monsters: legendary, rare, uncommon, and normal. Legendary had the least number of monsters, but it still had 47 types of legendary monsters. The first legendary monster was called Gilgamesh. It did not have the word swordsman, which was unique to monsters that were given names. It was an ancient legendary monster, and its introduction was also at the very beginning of the list. It was actually a 5-star legendary monster. Gilgamesh, 5-star legend. It is reported that there are only 3 Gilgamesh in the world. One of them was captured and exploded before dying, leaving no parasitic soulworm. The whereabouts of the other 2 are still unknown. Dean's eyelids twitched as he looked at the information above. This legendary monster, Gilgamesh, had never been captured. Didn't this mean that no one had its parasitic soulworm? Black Magician saw Dean turn to this page, smiled slightly, and said with emotion, "This legendary monster is not only the number 1 in our Giant Wall illustrated handbook of legendary monsters. I heard that even in the Empire, it is ranked in the top 5 of the 5-star legendary monsters. It is very rare. Since ancient times, no one has ever obtained its parasitic soulworm, including those big shots in the Empire." What a pity. Dean didn't expect him to know something about the Empire. He couldn't help but look at him. Then he thought that the Giant Wall was different from Sylvia. It had a close relationship with the Empire. It was assigned by the Empire to look after the Devil's Pit. It was normal for the residents here to have more contact and understanding about the Empire than the residents of Sylvia. His eyes fell on the blurred picture below. It was a picture taken by a camera. But maybe the focus was not right, so it was a bit blurry. Generally speaking, it was in a vast forest. A huge monster with a humanoid body was walking in the forest. Its arms were extremely long, almost reaching its knees. There were sharp blades on its arms, as well as vine tentacles. The monster's head was like a tree branch with its leaves cut off. It had irregular sharp horns. Its whole body had a silver-white, streamlined body. It was very strange. The most eye-catching thing was that it had 4 huge wings on its back. They were like erect black blades. Dean looked carefully and found that the forest under its feet was only up to its knees. It must be known that most of the trees in this world had already grown crazily under the influence of nuclear radiation. Especially in the forest, the trees were generally 20 to 30 meters high. If it was according to this ratio, wouldn't Gilgamesh be more than 150 meters high? Dean's pupils shrank. He felt an inexplicable shiver. This wasn't a storybook, but reality. A monster with a height of more than 150 meters was living in the same world as him. They were only separated by a giant wall. Just thinking about it made him shudder. It wasn't a problem to stop the average monster with the height of the giant wall. But in front of a monster like Gilgamesh, wasn't it just a matter of jumping? Dean couldn't imagine that such a huge creature could grow on the earth. It wasn't expansion, but rampage. The sense of crisis was very strong. But soon Dean calmed down. There was an ancient Chinese saying that if the sky collapsed, there would be a tall one to support it. If such a monster appeared in front of the giant wall, the weak civilians and the tall ones would be the most unlucky ones. Freemen like them could leave at any time. Resistance, 7 stars. Speed increase, 7 stars. Physique increase, 7 stars. Dean saw the following introduction, but it was marked as experimental speculation. The data was detected from Gilgamesh's severed limbs. It was the first time for Dean to see a 7-star evaluation. The highest he had seen before was only 5 stars. He thought that 5 stars was the limit. It seemed that the power contained in Gilgamesh was beyond the concept of ordinary legendary monsters. The basic increase in all aspects was estimated to be comparable to the increase in speed of low-level legendary monsters. The second legendary monster was called Leo. It was also an ancient legendary monster. From the name, it could be seen that this was a monster that controlled lightning. Its body contained extremely terrifying electricity. It fed on lightning and thunderbirds. Some people said that it was the king of thunderbirds, but others said that it was the nemesis of thunderbirds or even the bane of thunderbirds. However, it was also because of its simple living habits that it was easy to be captured. As long as thunder or thunderbirds were used as bait, it would be easy to lure it. Although it was strong, humans had always been used to defeating the strong with the weak. This was the unchanging ability of humans in all things on Earth. Leo was also a 5-star legendary monster. The basic increase in all aspects was 5 stars. Leo's magic mark had the ability to control electric current and was immune to all electric shocks. Dean saw that it was immune to all lightning. He knew that this statement was not rigorous enough. Even if the body cells transformed by Leo's magic mark could accommodate lightning, there was a limit. Even Leo itself couldn't bear all lightning. After all, lightning was the same as flames. There was no upper limit to its power. Dean continued to turn down the list. 4-star legendary monsters. From Gilgamesh to the third legendary monster, the difference in ability and rarity was dozens of times. It was almost a fault-like decline. The Black Magician noticed Dean's look and guessed his thoughts. He explained, "This Gilgamesh is a famous legendary monster in the entire empire. If it hadn't appeared in our area, it wouldn't have been recorded in our giant wall illustrated book. This Leo is our local legendary monster. More than 200 years ago, the third giant wall lord hunted a young Leo and inherited its magic mark. Later he was transferred away. I heard that he went to the empire to become a high-ranking official. This made his descendants not only live a happy life, but also brought the advanced technology of the empire to our giant wall. I know, each illustrated book only records the legendary monsters that have appeared in the giant wall territory." Dean indifferently responded. He estimated that the real list of legendary monsters could only be seen in the empire. In the giant wall of Sylvia, there is only one 5-star legendary monster, Dream Breeder. Moreover, it had appeared before, but no Sylvian had ever obtained the magic mark of Dream Breeder. After finishing the legendary book, Dean continued to read the rare book. There were 271 kinds of rare monsters. It was a rich variety. Dread? Dean saw a familiar name. He didn't expect that there would be Dread in the giant wall. It was one of the top 10 rare monsters in Sylvia, but here, it was ranked 42nd. The past slowly poured into his mind. Dean was silent for a moment, then slowly recovered. He tidied up his mood and continued to read. 2 hours later, the thick monster illustrated handbook was completely flipped by Dean. These are the parasitic soul worms of these 7 monsters. Help me see where I can get them. Dean handed the 8 names of the monsters to the Black Mage. The Black Mage realized why Dean wrote down these names. He glanced at the book and saw that there were no legendary monsters. He was relieved, but thinking that these 8 were rare monsters, he suddenly felt a headache. These rare soul worms can be bought in black shops and underground markets. You can also buy them at a high price in the Magic Research Institute. But the price of these 8 rare soul worms is not less than a legendary soul worm. Although legendary soul worms are hard to come by, but rare soul worms are usually priceless. Even if I have the money to buy them, I can't find these 8 rare soul worms for sale in a short time. How can there be such a coincidence? Unless we go to the Magic Research Institute to buy them. They supply them all year round, but the price is half the price of a legendary soul worm. Then let's go to the Magic Research Institute to buy one first. Dean said. The Black Mage slightly opened his mouth. He couldn't wait to slap himself. This. Which one do you want to buy first? The Black Mage felt that his heart was bleeding. Dean took a look and chose a rare monster called Tortoise. This monster was good at defense and hiding. Both abilities were excellent. Generally, When a tortoise encountered a monster stronger than itself, it would turn its whole body into a rock. It could not only enhance its defense, but also hide its aura. At the same time, it could also turn into a rock for ambush and sneak attack other monsters. The black mage's eyelids twitched. I know. I'll go and ask if there are any. I'll wait for you outside. Dean patted the black mage's shoulder. The black mage smiled in his heart. It was clear that Dean was afraid that he would deliberately say no and deliberately eavesdrop. The black mage disguised himself and entered the Magic Research Institute. It didn't take long for him to come out. He looked at Dean. Our luck is good. There is one. I have paid the deposit, and it is being dispatched from the headquarters. It will arrive tomorrow. Dean nodded. He had already heard the exchange. Let's go back. The next day, the turtle shell's soul worm was retrieved from the Magic Research Institute. Dean took the black mage to the remote manor where the lightning filter was stored. He took a drop of the turtle's soul worm's blood and put it into the lightning filter. He was relieved when he saw that the final landscape of the blood was like an icicle. Although he hadn't used the lightning filter to see the clone soul worm in the temple of the Cargel giant wall. But he expected that the soul worm had combined with the origami factor. The final landscape will be different. The deified soul worm was a pit. Once it was used up, it would be hopeless to turn into an abyss. It seems that the Magic Research Institute has cultivated a lot of soul worms. It shouldn't be a simple coincidence. Dean was curious whether the Magic Research Institute had mastered the breeding method of soul worms. But it was useless for him. Even if he had a way, he expected that the materials and resources needed were not trivial. It was a big deal. He had no fixed residence, so he couldn't manage it. For him, the most important thing was still power. With power came status and everything else. After all, since the ancient times, only power could lead to the highest level. It was just like in the olden era. For those who work for a living, education was the best stepping stone. But for the society, money was the hardest skill. Even if you were a waste, you could be supported by the people with money. For those countries, the strongest weapon was nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons had the capital to negotiate. Otherwise, no matter how good the country's culture and economy was, it was just a fat pig that could be slaughtered at any time. I can't kill you, but it will make you stronger. If I don't die, then the heart will be able to withstand my squandering. 7 kings of the empire, wait for me. Dean's eyes flashed. The most efficient way to find Aisha was to become one of the 7 kings and gather all the power of the giant wall to search the entire territory of the empire. In any case, Aisha was in this territory. Dean took a deep breath and cut a small slit on the body of the tortoise soul worm. It looked a bit like a cockroach, but its body was grayish-white. At this moment, cold, light black blood dripped from its body and fell into the wound on his palm. Absorb it and prove that my guess is right. Dean silently closed his eyes and prayed in his heart. Chapter 1034. Dean quickly cut the wound, took out the blood from inside, and put it into the Thunderbolt filter for analysis. Soon he found that the final landscape in the blood had changed. The blue ball was surrounded by a faint ring of stars. Did this mean that he had mastered the power of magic marks? Dean was happy and looking forward to it. He moved his fingers and stimulated the power of the magic marks like in the past. He injected his blood into his fingers and tightened the meridians between his fingers. His fingers turned into a white stone palm in the blink of an eye. It was really done. Dean was so excited that he almost jumped up. He hadn't been so excited for a long time. The experiment was confirmed, so his conjecture was correct. His body could accommodate a variety of magic marks. After the excitement, Dean quickly thought of the magic marks of the splitter. He immediately stimulated the splitter's magic marks. There was no hindrance as a sharp thorn extended from his back. He tried to use the splitter's magic marks on his palm. A strange scene appeared. His arm turned into a stone splitter. It looked like a stone scythe. The overlapping of magic marks. Dean's eyes widened as he looked at the petrified arm incredulously. He felt that his whole body was about to be petrified. It was incredible. The first thing he thought of was the terrifying possibility of this result. After a long time, Dean slowly recovered. It was still difficult for him to adapt and accept such a reality. He suddenly felt like he was dreaming. It felt like he had suddenly gained the power of God from an ordinary person. Yes, although his previous physique was not weak and very strong, it was only at the first-class level. There was still a huge gap between him and the top existences like the Seven Kings, and it was difficult to make up for it. After all, the rarity of the Iceworm King might be even rarer than a 5-star legendary monster like Gilgamesh. However, at this moment, the petrified arm brought him great hope and infinite possibilities. The overlapping of magic marks and the multiple absorption of magic marks' abilities. This meant that Burrow's conjecture was confirmed. His ideal god was created by Crimson Moon, gathering the abilities of a large number of magic marks, superimposing the magic marks' abilities, and reaching the top in all aspects. There were no shortcomings, no flaws. This was almost the template of the ideal, perfect creature. Perhaps the end of evolution was like this. Is this what it means to be happy after suffering? The God creation experiment actually succeeded. Dean touched the petrified blade, feeling a little unreal. He was suddenly glad that Crimson Moon had abandoned him. If she knew that her experiment was not wrong, he would have become her #1 fighter at this moment. However, Dean suddenly remembered that Crimson Moon abandoned him because of the failure of the experiment. He thought of the heart formed in his chest and suddenly felt that he was still one step away from being a perfect creature. At least, his heart was not perfect. This was his only flaw. Perhaps, he could only be considered a defective product of God. A defective product of God. Should it be called a demon? Dean muttered to himself with a wry smile. The excitement in his heart gradually subsided. If Crimson Moon's theory was correct, with his current body, even if it was a defective product, it had the potential to surpass the Seven Kings. Moreover, he did not need the Arctic Insect King to evolve to the point of surpassing the Seven Kings. After all, relying on the Arctic Insect King would eventually be affected by the Insect King. That was not the purpose of Burrow's God creation experiment. Crimson Moon's experiment is still ongoing. I don't know if she will create a real god. Perhaps a new era will come, an era of gods, and humans will be ruled by gods. Dean looked at the flashing lightning in front of him, a little lost in thought. His association was not impossible. Although this was still far from the problem he was facing right now, Confucius was right. If you don't think far ahead, you will have immediate worries. The difference between ordinary people and rich people in this world was that ordinary people mostly considered the current life, while businessmen knew how to see the changes of the times, prepare for a rainy day, and pave the way in advance. Dean had to think in advance. If Crimson Moon created a large number of gods, what would happen to the world structure, and how would he survive in this change? As he thought about it, his thoughts seemed to drift thousands of miles away. He stood there blankly for the whole afternoon until the Black Mage knocked on the door and delivered dinner. Dean came back to his senses and suddenly noticed that the soul worm of the tortoise shell, which had been scratched for blood, was dying. He immediately asked the Black Mage to put down the dinner and drive it out. Then he absorbed the whole soul worm of the tortoise shell into his body. After a short itch, his body gradually calmed down. Dean tested it, and sure enough, he could enter the magic mark of the tortoiseshell state. His whole body petrified, coiled up like a rock, and no smell was emitted. After dinner, they rested for the night. The next day, Dean secretly returned to Burn Manor with the Black Mage. When he returned to the basement of the manor, he listened to the guard's report. He learned that the plump woman who had been tortured by the Black Magician had died on the operating table. After they left, although the guard provided the prisoners with food and drink, the transplanted tissue in the plump woman's body mutated. Pustules appeared all over her body, and strange worms like centipedes hatched from the pustules. The worms bit the woman to death. The guard were also scared to death by the hellish scene. They took a few photos with their cameras and kept them. Dean glanced at the photos and frowned. Even with his psychological endurance, he felt a burst of discomfort. Although he did not look in the mirror, he felt that his face had become tense. The black mage saw the photos, but covered his mouth and vomited at the side. His face was extremely ugly. After he finished vomiting, Dean asked the black mage to dispose of all the prisoners here. It was impossible to repatriate and release the prisoners. These prisoners would be exposed here, so he could only give them a comfortable euthanasia. Although it was very cruel, for Dean, life was not equal. In the case that he did not need to face it directly, people for him might be just a word, and the number of casualties was just a number. Only when he saw the tragedy of death, perhaps he would be touched by the physiological reaction and produce discomfort. But if he did not directly face the blood, even if the things done were very cruel, he would not feel it. Perhaps everyone was like this. After sending away the group of people, Dean told the black mage to prepare to slowly sell the burned family's property to raise money as soon as possible. Chapter 1035. The other slave, Peter, accompanied the black magician to help Dean sell the Bourne family's property. Dean spent most of his time in the major libraries of Phoenix City. He read all kinds of books and quickly learned about the situation of the giant wall of Balga. He also learned a lot about the Empire and the secrets of the Devil's Pit from these books. As he guessed, the Devil's Pit was the location where the nuclear weapons from the old era fell. No wonder the nuclear radiation in the Devil's Pit was so strong. It was dozens of times stronger than the outside world. Moreover, the exploration team sent by the giant wall found a lot of strange things in the Devil's Pit. From the black and white photos, it was clear that there were all kinds of broken spaceships. Some were cracked barrels, some were rudders of the spaceships, and some were broken spaceships. The nuclear weapons didn't destroy the insects, but changed the Earth beyond recognition. Dean sighed. He felt sad. The world created by nuclear weapons would eventually be retaliated on the heads of humans. However, it wasn't difficult to see that the Devil's Pit was the main location where the spaceships appeared. Perhaps the reason why the nuclear weapons fell here was to attack the headquarters of the insects. Unfortunately, he was not the only one who could see this. It was estimated that all the demonic pits in the Empire had been plundered countless times by the Seven Kings. They even deliberately let the giant wall of Porges stand guard. Their purpose was obviously not as simple as detecting the changes in the demonic energy radiation in the demonic pit. Dean wasn't interested in going to the Devil's Pit. Instead, he thought about the spaceship in the ice dragon's nest. There were a lot of ice insects and the suspected ice insect king. Although his body didn't need them to evolve and become stronger, but he could take them and give them to Noise to improve their strength. However, he didn't plan to go there for the time being. The suspected ice insect king had left a big shadow in his heart. Moreover, Noise and Barton hadn't established a foothold in the giant wall yet. Moreover, he had many experimental ideas that he hadn't had time to verify with the lightning filter. The theft of the lightning filter didn't cause much of a stir in the Nile territory. The main reason was that this thing was a wizard's artifact and couldn't see the light of day. Moreover, the assassin of Brank didn't leave any clues. Even the professional deacon of the magistrate couldn't find any useful clues. They could only continue to track in the dark. However, the theft of the thunder filter had caused quite a commotion among the wizards. Rumors spread like wildfire, and there were all sorts of speculations. Many wizards even declared that they would find the culprit and avenge Brank. More magi were secretly paying attention to relevant news, hoping to obtain the lightning filter. Half a year passed in the blink of an eye. Time passed quickly. Noise, Barton, Macon, and others had taken root in the giant wall of Berga. They had their own identity. Some were lawyers, some were musicians, some were admitted to the Knights' Hall, and some were mixed into the magistrate as apprentice knights. Everyone was like a big net. Under the intentional arrangement of Noise, they were scattered into various circles of the giant wall. In the past 6 months, Dean's harvest was the greatest. Relying on the characteristics of his own genes, he successfully absorbed 5 soul worms. Coupled with his own abilities of Splitter and Sun Bee Soul Worm, it was equivalent to having the abilities of 7 soul worms. Among the 5 newly added soul worms, other than the first tortoise shell, which was a rare magical creature. The other 4 were all legendaries. One of the 4 legendary soul worms was bought from the Born family. The other 3 didn't come from soul worms, but from human beings. This was also one of Dean's biggest gains. When the pioneers of the Born family and the ruler who cooperated with the Black Magician to divide the Born and Barrett industries rebelled, he killed them. Originally, he planned to use their bodies for research, but then he suddenly thought that the magic marks contained in their bodies could be absorbed into his own body. As a result of the experiment, he found that it was really possible. This broke Dean's original inherent thinking. Later, after various attempts, he found that he could not only absorb ability fragments from the body of the soul worm, but also devour other creatures to absorb the characteristics of the creature. For example, directly devouring a bloodthirsty leech, his body would have the blood-sucking ability of the bloodthirsty leech, and he could rely on blood to replenish his own consumption. But this kind of direct absorption had a flaw. The appearance of the genes would change accordingly. After absorbing the genes of a wolf, a portion of the sample flesh he used for his experiments grew thick fur on the surface of the flesh. He suspected that if his body directly absorbed the genes, he would also experience a partial transformation. In fact, the more genes he absorbed, the more parts of his body would mutate, and in the end, he would turn into a form that he didn't even dare to imagine. In contrast, soul worms seemed to be a filter. Dean already understood a little. The worms that he saw in the Earth Dragon Cave in Amelie's tribe were primitive soul worms that didn't parasitize any creatures. These soul worms were produced from ice worms, but not all soul worms could grow into ice worms. It seemed that the environment didn't allow it, or there was a lack of something. Although they were born from the mother, they couldn't become ice worms. But soul worms had a characteristic that ice worms didn't have. That was parasitizing other creatures and relying on other creatures to survive. While parasitizing, the soul worm would absorb the organism's genes and copy them into its own body. When it parasitized another organism, it would copy the genetic abilities in its body to the new parasite and slowly transform the new parasite's body. This was like moving to a new place, but it was still very nostalgic about its original home, so it would also decorate the new home to look like its original home. Of course, for these soul worms, it might not be because of nostalgia, but because of adaptation. If he directly absorbed the gene chain copied from these soul worms, Dean's body could be controlled within the scope of the original, and there wouldn't be too much change on the surface. It was like discarding some rough things and only extracting the core genes inside. However, through the observation of the Thunder filter, Dean found that the negative effect of directly absorbing from other magic marks was smaller than absorbing from soul worms. It was like the magic mark ability was the second filter. After continuously absorbing the abilities of 5 different magic marks, Dean found that the final landscape of his cells was surrounded by illusory star rings on the surface of the 4 color balls, and among them, the blue ball was surrounded by 2. Chapter 1036. In a manor in a small town on the outskirts of the Phoenix territory, the spacious hall was filled with people. Each of them had a different temperament, but most of them were not people to be trifled with. Dean sat on the sofa in the middle of the room. His handsome face had a scholarly aura. He looked around and saw that Noyce, Sergei, and others had arrived. It's not a big deal. I'm going to leave in the near future to find something. I'll be back in a few months. You don't have to worry about it. Continue to lurk according to the original plan. Everyone looked at each other with some doubts and reluctance. They knew that Dean would not change his decision for them. Noyce's heart sank as he heard Dean's words. Although he expected such a day, but he didn't expect it to come so soon. He bit his teeth. Master, I want to go with you. Me too. Macon next to him quickly said. I'll go too. Aurora also quickly raised her hand. Teacher, me too. Edward hurriedly called out. There's still us. I want to go too. The others did not want to be left behind and quickly expressed their opinions. Dean raised his hand to suppress the noise. He looked at the sadness in Noyce's eyes. It's not like I won't come back. You will only hinder me if you follow me. Noyce, I'll need you to take care of this place while I'm gone. If there's any trouble, you'll be punished. Don't say that I didn't remind you. Noyce was startled as he saw Dean's warm eyes. He felt that he was mistaken. He couldn't help but ask, "Master, will you really come back?" "Of course." Dean smiled. "My body is recovering well, so there shouldn't be any problems. You don't have to worry about me. Instead, you have to take care of yourselves while I'm away. It's best to treat this place as your nest, or even your future home. Perhaps in the future, we will have the opportunity to move to the Giant Wall Empire. However, the environment there is more complex and dangerous than here. I hope you can adapt to this place in advance and live well. Take this as an experience." "Young master, are you really planning to go to the Divine Kingdom?" Barton asked in surprise. "That will depend on the future situation and your performance." Dean clapped his hands. He didn't want to talk about the future plans. Let them rest first. "I have something to tell you." Noyce, Barton, Macon, and others understood and let their confidence retreat. "If it's possible, find out the situation of the 8 lords in this period of time, especially the Wall Lord and the mysterious leader of the sorcerers, the Sorcerer King." Dean looked at Noyce. "But don't be too hasty. Don't let them uproot you. Wait for me to come back and deal with any news." "I understand, young master." Noyce nodded. "I'll leave Peter and the Dark Wizard to you. Although they are stronger than you, but they can't see the light of day. Deal with them and use them as much as possible." Dean said to Noyce. "Yes, young master," Noyce said seriously. Sergei said, "Young master, those 2 are lords. We are still in the inner wilderness. What if they don't listen to us? Isn't it too dangerous?" Noyce didn't wait for Dean to speak as he looked at him. "Use your brain. We have their weakness in our hands, and the young master is behind us. They won't dare to go against us. Don't forget how the young master dealt with the enemies who were stronger than the young master." Sergei scratched his head. "But the young master is the young master, and we are us. Can we deal with them?" Noyce rolled his eyes. "Do you think I'm following the young master for nothing?" Dean smiled and looked at his pocket watch. He saw that the curfew time was coming. He asked Noyce to dismiss his confidants and let them return to the city ahead of time. On the second day, when Dean was ready to leave Balga, a huge airship suddenly appeared outside the giant wall. The bright silver hull reflected the sunlight like a rainbow arc. The ship, the sails, and the hull were exactly the same as the ship. The only difference was that the bottom of the ship was ejecting red and blue flames like a rocket. Behind the airship was a rain of locusts. When they got closer, they could see that it was an air-jet airship. This airship was relatively small and could carry no more than 5 people. But the number of airships was very large. They were all over the giant wall, surrounding the airship that was the size of an aircraft carrier. It looked extremely spectacular, like a dream. Dean had just backed up the purified water needed in the wilderness. As soon as he opened a window, he saw the shocking scene. He felt like he was watching a science fiction movie. Moreover, it was an interstellar war. What's the situation? Dean was confused. The residents who got up early in the giant wall also saw this spectacular spectacle. In front of the windows and on the road, the residents all looked up with a blank face. Dean used his binoculars to see the strange pattern engraved on the hull of the huge airship. It was a blood-red twisted vine. It was the emblem symbol. Seeing this symbol, he heaved a sigh of relief. He had seen this symbol before. It represented one of the 7 kings of the empire, the Bloodthorn King. He had learned about it from Felicia. Later, when the Bloodthorn King went to besiege Burrow, he had also seen his appearance and the symbol on his armor. "I thought it was an alien invasion." Dean slightly curled his lips. His eyes swept over the huge spaceship and the many airships next to it. The golden light flashed in his eyes. Soon he saw the internal structure of the spaceship and the airships. He found something strange. The internal energy of the spaceship didn't rely on aviation gasoline, but a huge crystal. The crystal was like a battery. It was connected to a dense network. A steady stream of special energy was transmitted from the crystal to the propeller of the airship. The energy would turn into a flame and propel the airship. In addition, the airship didn't only rely on the flame to propel it. There were many rows of vents under the hull. It was like an air conditioner. The gap between the vents would produce a strong wind to support the airship. Moreover, the exhaust was active. It could adjust the angle and control the direction. Is this the technology of the Empire? Dean slightly narrowed his eyes. The energy output of the crystal was as transparent as a crystal. However, the crystal would never be converted into such a strong energy. This technology was ahead of the old era. The speed of the airship slowed down. It slowly approached the center of the giant wall. The surrounding airships were scattered like locusts. They gradually gathered together like a big net. Dean frowned as he saw the trajectory of the spaceship. It seemed that the spaceship was going to stop at the giant wall. Was there something terrifying in the sixth devil pit that was guarded by the giant wall? Did it come to crusade against it? Dean was lost in thought. He was not only thinking about the purpose of the airship, but also the information brought by the airship. It was the technology of the Empire. He didn't know how advanced the technology of the Empire was. However, he knew that the electric light had appeared on the giant wall as early as 150 years ago. It must be known that the total time for people in the old era to use electric light was less than 150 years ago. In other words, the civilization level of the Empire was not inferior to the old era. Moreover, if the electric light came from the Empire, then who knows how many years it took for the Empire to introduce it to the giant wall. Just like Sylvia, who didn't learn to use electricity for more than 300 years. If the giant wall didn't have the task of guarding the sixth devil pit, then perhaps the fate of the giant wall wouldn't be far from Sylvia's. He suddenly thought that the Empire was deliberately suppressing the technology inside the giant wall, just like how the nobles in the inner wall monopolized the technology. Was the purpose of this just stupid greed and selfishness? It must be known that the life of the Empire wasn't easy. They had to resist the invasion of foreign races at the border. They also had to maintain the harmony of the abyss inside the wall. They also had to eliminate the terrifying existence that might be born in the devil pit. All of these were enough to bring a sense of crisis to the Empire. However, suppressing the technology inside the giant wall was like cutting off one's own arms. Dean couldn't figure it out. He had read a lot of secret information when he ruled Sylvia, but there was no record of this. He felt that there must be a reason that he hadn't thought of yet. What was the reason that the Empire had to suppress the technology inside the giant wall when they were thirsty for power? He thought hard for a moment, but still couldn't figure out. He found that his thoughts were diverted. He didn't know the reason why the Empire suppressed the technology inside the giant wall. But the technology of the Empire was so advanced that it was a pipe dream for him to break into the Empire alone and seize the throne. If the technology of the Empire was similar to that of the giant wall, then he could rely on the knowledge of the old era to manufacture advanced electric weapons, laser weapons, and the like to rule the Empire. But now the technology of the Empire had reached the point where he couldn't understand it. His biggest trump card, the knowledge of the old era, was completely useless in the Empire. This meant that if he wanted to be the king of the Empire, then he had to learn the technology of the Empire as soon as possible and then surpass it in the field of science and technology. Or he had to be several times stronger than the average king. He had to be so strong that they wouldn't be able to use the technology to defend themselves. However, Dean knew how terrible the power of technology was. Even the king didn't dare to step out of the earth. But the technology could do it. Even the king who surpassed the king would turn into ashes in front of the nuclear weapons. This was the power of technology. It was something that couldn't be achieved by living things. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but want to smash everything in front of him. He thought that by relying on his current body, it would be easy for him to win the position of the king in the Empire. Then he would use the power of the king to find Aisha. Everything was perfect. But this beautiful idea was suddenly broken. Even if he had the strength to surpass the king, what could he do? The 7 kings wouldn't be stupid enough to fight with him and lose to give up the throne. They wouldn't be stupid enough to know that his strength was enough to be the king. So they would make him the 8th king to separate their own resources and territory. The real result would be that once the 7 kings knew of his existence, they would use various means to attack and destroy him. He wasn't afraid to fight with only his physique. But the Empire was the nest of the Seven Kings. They had been dominating for many years. They had mastered the technology that he didn't understand. Even if he wanted to have a fair and square duel, it would be wishful thinking. Originally, he felt that he could cross it in one step. But suddenly it became as difficult as ascending to the sky. Dean had the urge to grab the air, but eventually he endured and gradually calmed down. The goal couldn't be changed, so he could only find a way to complete the goal, no matter how difficult it was. Dean took a few deep breaths and completely calmed down. He was ready to see what the spaceship was going to do at the giant wall of Balga. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Dean looked at the sky, full of airships following the spaceship in the sky. They left the sky and went into the distance until they completely disappeared. Dean immediately looked for Peter and Black Magician to find a way to inquire about the purpose of the spaceship. Both of them were pressured by Dean. They spent a lot of money to carefully inquire about the information from various channels. Finally, they brought back the information and reported it to Dean. I heard that there's a war in the south of the Empire. This spaceship belongs to the 7th Legion under the command of the Bloodthorn King. They're going to the southern border as reinforcements. It seems that the elder brother of the Wall King is the commander of the 7th Legion. The information that the two of them brought back was more or less the same and could be considered reliable. Dean knew that the information was reliable when he heard them mention the Bloodthorn King. But the information brought back by Peter surprised Dean. He didn't expect that the elder brother of the Balga giant wall was working for the Bloodthorn King. It seemed that the giant wall of Balga was also under the jurisdiction of the Bloodthorn King. Regardless of whether the information was true or false, the war in the south made Dean a little concerned. He remembered that Felicia had said that the Empire was surrounded by enemies on all sides. The Fire Dragon clan from the east, the Troll clan from the south, and the Snow Ape clan from the north. The west side was the best. It faced the sea, so there were few battles. But often when the tide rose, there would be a big mess. Even the wall of God of War could be destroyed. Compared to the turmoil on the other three sides, the west side didn't move. But if there was a problem, it would be a big problem. Chapter 10:37. Although he was curious and wanted to see, Dean didn't plan to follow the footsteps of the Bloodthorn Legion spaceship. His original plan was still the same, but he included the southern border into his future itinerary. Dean left the giant wall that night. The full moon hung high in the sky. The sound of frogs croaking and strange hissing in the dark forest outside the giant wall became the eternal music of the world outside the giant wall. Dean carried his backpack and rushed all the way to the east. After midnight, Dean had completely left the area that was reclaimed by the giant wall and came to the abyss. He didn't stop, but kept flying at a low altitude and hurried on his way. From time to time, Bloody Mouse would jump out from the ground to bite him, but he easily dodged them. Sharp blades shot out from his body and sliced through the mouths. Then, his body did not stop at all and flew far away like a puff of smoke. Dean killed 7 or 8 Dominator-level monsters and an abyss monster that blocked his way. At dawn the next day, he came to a bare hill and sat down to rest. He drank a few mouthfuls of purified water and ate a few pieces of smoked beast meat. The warm feeling caressed his face. Dean faced the morning glow and looked at the vast plain and small forest in front of the hill. He could still see the traces of the old era's road between the weeds of the plain. He suddenly felt a little lonely. In the past, when he was in the abyss, he had Aisha to accompany him. Although he talked all the way, he always had a companion. But this time he was the only one left. The whole old era was destroyed, and he was the only one left. How could he be happy when he lived to the end? Dazed and missing, Dean sat on the hill, lost in thought. Only after a long time did he come back to his senses. Then he collected his thoughts and continued on his journey. Half a month later, Dean came to a forest with strong radiation concentration. He stood on a treetop in the forest and looked at the surrounding environment. He muttered to himself, "The ice dragon is dead, but the temperature is still so low. The snow in the forest hasn't melted. Is there a new master?" That's right. The purpose of his trip was to find the demonic insect spaceship in the Arctic frost dragon's lair. Along the way, he met a lot of monsters with ice and snow physique. The body structure of these monsters seemed to be completely different from ordinary monsters. Most of their bodies looked snow white, and their scales were crystal clear. Their hair was pure white, and the horns on the top of their head were like icicles. Even the blood in their body was white, and there was no heat emitting from their body. Dean felt that it would be very interesting to study these monsters on the experimental bench. In this world, the changes of living things far exceeded the progress of research. When people analyzed the body structure of a type of monster, new monsters and mutated creatures would appear. Life that had never been thoroughly studied since ancient times possessed unimaginable diversity. Different environments and factors would create different life forms. Dean cut off two monsters that were waiting for an opportunity to sneak attack him. He came to the end of the forest without any hindrance. The lake where the ice dragon lived was still there. The lake was as smooth and tranquil as a mirror. The spaceship is still there. Dean's eyes penetrated the surface of the lake and saw the depths of the lake. The place where his X-ray ability couldn't reach was now easily extended. In addition to his X-ray ability, he also had the ability to increase the vision range by more than 10 times. It was like having a telescope. It was the icing on the cake for someone who could see very far. However, this was just a small ability that came with the legendary magic mark, just like the X-ray ability of the splitter. The material of the spaceship couldn't penetrate into the lake, but Dean was relieved to see that the spaceship was still there. It meant that Felicia hadn't come here yet. At this time, from the corner of his eyes, he saw a snow-white shadow entrenched on another dark reef rock at the bottom of the lake. A sea python? Dean's eyes penetrated the scales and saw the structure of its body. He quickly retracted his eyes and picked up a boulder from the ground and threw it into the lake. The mirror-like surface of the lake was suddenly broken by the waves. The snow-white sea python at the bottom of the lake suddenly opened its eyes. Its amber, dark golden pupils were emotionless. It raised its head and looked at the place where the boulder fell. Its coiled body was also slowly pulled up and swam up. Soon, Dean saw a shadow that was more than 10 meters long. He flew over and got close to the surface of the lake. The snow-white sea serpent swam under Dean's feet. It seemed to find that Dean was motionless above the lake. It gradually became restless and suddenly jumped out of the lake. Water splashed everywhere, and a bloody mouth full of sharp teeth came toward Dean. Its mouth was big enough to swallow Dean whole. A splitting blade extended from Dean's back. The dark blade fiercely swung, and the ferocious mouth was torn apart. White blood sputtered out like milk, but it was very cold like frozen water when it fell on Dean's body. The body of the white sea serpent fell into the lake and slowly sank. Dean immediately changed of place. He took a deep breath and plunged into the lake. He quickly swam toward the spaceship at the bottom of the lake. Soon, he came to the spaceship. He went through the entrance and came to a place inside the spaceship that looked like a water tank. Sticking out his head from the inside, he saw the corridor inside the spaceship. The floor of the corridor was covered with bronze steel pipes. It seemed that the spaceship was the body of a huge creature, and the complex dark cyan steel pipes were its blood vessels and veins. There was no water in the spaceship. The mysterious reason made Dean have no time to think about it. The technology of the magic insect spaceship was far ahead of the Earth. It was beyond his understanding that it could cross the distant galaxy to the Earth. He wrung out the water on his body, and then used the heat brought by the sun beast to dry his clothes. The water evaporated and then released all the perception of the magic marks. Ultrasonic hearing, X-ray vision, smell, and long-range touch extended from the soles of his feet, so that he could feel the movement under the metal under the soles of his feet. The sound of wind came from the corridor, and there was a very slight friction sound mixed with the wind. There was a slightly sticky feeling. Dean's mind was filled with the picture of the insect gently wriggling with sticky liquid. His eyes were dignified as he slowly walked along the corridor. He didn't know whether his current strength could suppress all the ice insects here, and also the giant insect that was being fed by the ice insects. Along the corridor, Dean saw that there were blood stains on the ground. They had long dried up, and it seemed that there was fresh blood here. After bypassing 2 aisles, a metal door was closed, and the corridor was cut off. Dean was slightly startled. Last time, this door didn't seem to be closed. It's closed here. Are they protecting themselves? Dean raised his hand and touched the door, trying to sense the situation behind the door, but he felt nothing. The range of his long-range touch was only about 4 or 5 meters, which was very limited. But it was a very strong ability in close combat. It was the ability that was drawn from the magic mark of a pioneer. Dean gently scratched the metal door with the splitting blade, but couldn't make a mark. Although it was related to the strength, it was the first time that he encountered something that couldn't be damaged by the splitting blade. The solidity of the spaceship was beyond his imagination. After the surprise, Dean felt that his surprise was a little funny. The magic insect used this spaceship to cross the galaxy, so the solidity was naturally beyond ordinary metal materials. If he could easily cut it, it would be abnormal. Since this road was blocked, he could only find another way. Dean was about to go back along the original road. Suddenly, he saw a raised ball by the door, flashing red light like a camera. He leaned over and looked at it. He was suspicious. This thing could emit light. Didn't it mean that this spaceship still had energy? While he was thinking, suddenly there was a click. Dean was so scared that his expression changed. Uncontrollably, his whole body suddenly ejected numerous sharp blades. The sharp blades were burning with flames, protecting his whole body like a hedgehog. The next moment, the panic in his eyes was replaced by astonishment. He saw that the closed door in front of him was slowly opening. Something is controlling here? Dean looked at the slowly opened door. His pupils contracted slightly. He felt a chill climb up his back, and his hair stood up. The door opened. There was nothing in the aisle behind, but there were a lot of bloodstains and residual hair on the aisle and the walls. Dean's perception quickly extended to the corner at the end. There was wind coming, and the sound of slime sliding became louder. In addition, there was a very low-frequency cooing sound. The sound was very strange, like an unknown language. Dean hesitated for a moment, but finally braced himself and walked in. He thought that if he had been discovered, there was no point in hiding. Since he was here, he might as well see what the hell was inside. Soon, he walked along the corridor and once again came to the spacious space he saw before. The strong smell of rotting corpses came from afar and filled the nearby passages. In this spacious space that looked like a church, there was a giant black tree rooted in the middle. In the middle of the giant tree, there seemed to be something like a bird's nest supporting it. Inside the nest was a snow-white insect that was nearly 3 meters tall. It was chubby, but it had extremely thin and sharp antennae on its body. The branches of the giant black tree extended around, like a giant opening its arms and legs to embrace the world. Under 2 of the thick branches hung 4 or 5 pupae of different sizes. These pupaes' heads were exposed, but their bodies were very tightly wrapped in white silk, and they were oval. These heads belonged to monsters. Some were like lizard heads, and some were like leopard heads. The Barker that Dean saw last time was long gone. With various kinds of perception, Dean found that these monsters in the pupae were not dead. Their heads were still breathing. Perhaps this was the reason why only their heads were exposed. Hiss! A familiar sound echoed. Dean turned his head and saw that there were snow-white python-like ice worms drilled out of the holes in the roots of the giant black tree. They raised their heads, but their heads were not triangular like snakes, but oval. There were no eyes or mouth on their heads, but because of this, it brought a stronger fear. 1, 2, 3. Ice worms continued to drill out of the holes. They raised their heads and looked at the intruders. Some of the ice worms' heads were split in the middle, and Dean could see that it was a mouth full of fine and sharp teeth. It seems that no one has been here. Dean saw the situation was the same as last time. His heart was relieved, but he thought about the door that was opened inexplicably. He felt that there was a pair of invisible eyes staring at him in the dark. He didn't dare to relax. He had to deal with the ice worms in front of him first. Very quickly, the extreme ice worms climbed onto the suspended cocoons and crawled into the eyes or nostrils of the demonic creatures. After a short while, these demonic creatures woke up one by one. They opened their eyes, and their eyes were filled with killing intent as they shook their bodies. The cocoons broke open, and the demonic creatures slid out from within. Along with them was a large amount of water. To be more accurate, it was an unknown mucus. The monster shook its hair out of the mucus and roared at Dean. "There are only 5 of them. It seems that you are not enough." Dean raised his hand and covered his arm with a sharp blade. A 7 or 8 meters long lizard-like monster rushed towards him. It opened its bloody mouth. Dean took the initiative to greet it. Whoosh! His arm passed through the lizard-like monster's mouth. Blood sputtered all the way to its abdomen. It was almost cut into 2 pieces. At this time, the rest of the monsters also rushed towards him. Dean moved his body to avoid the attacks. He counterattacked at the same time. In less than a few minutes, 5 monsters were crippled by Dean. Their heads were cut off, their bodies were cut, and their organs fell out. They couldn't move at all. The strength of these monsters was at the Dominator level. Only one of them was close to the Abyss level. However, it was not enough in front of him. After all, this time he didn't have a powerful carrier like Felicia. 5 ice worms crawled out of the head of the monster and formed a line of defense in front of the giant black tree. To be precise, they were guarding in front of the giant white worm on top of the giant tree. It should be the Ice Worm King, since it was protected by so many ice worms. Dean was a little excited, but not too excited. Although the Ice Worm King was the road to the king. But he knew from Burrow that once one became the king, it would be like being possessed by a demon. So even if he got the Ice Worm King, he couldn't get it to Noise and the others. However, it didn't mean that the Ice Worm King was of no value to him. The appearance of an extreme ice insect king would cause a commotion anywhere. Chapter 1038. The confrontation didn't last long. The ice worm didn't know what it meant to be still, so it couldn't hold back and launch an attack first. Dean looked calm and wasn't as flustered as last time. When the ice worm was about to get close, his whole body ignited with blazing flames. His whole body turned into a ball of raging fire. The high temperature instantly dispersed the surrounding cold air, and the metal under his feet quickly heated up. The 7 or 8 ice worms that rushed up saw the burning Dean and immediately stopped moving. They seemed to be stunned for a moment, but soon their raised heads cracked open their mouths and spat out saliva. The saliva would quickly freeze when it touched something, and it was even more powerful than a freezer. However, when the saliva met with Dean's flame, it quickly melted and white smoke rose. The sun beast that he got from the flame soul worm seemed to be the natural nemesis of the ice worm. Moreover, Dean's physique wasn't weak, so he could fully display the strength of the sun beast. At this moment, when he was attacked by the ice worm's quick freezing saliva, the flame on his body was only slightly weakened, but it didn't affect him much. Seeing this, he calmed down, released the splitting blade, and quickly pounced towards the ice worm. Whoosh! Puff! The burning flame pounced on the ice worm one after another. These ice worms didn't dare to use their bodies to wrap around Dean, so they just kept spitting saliva. Soon, they were approached by Dean one by one, and were quickly dismembered by the splitting blade. They turned into lumps of sticky white meat and fell to the ground, but they were still slowly wriggling. Their tenacious vitality made them almost immortal. However, there was no real immortality. The power of nature was enough to destroy everything. Dean's burning boots stepped on a few lumps of snow-white wriggling meat, and white smoke suddenly rose. The size of the few lumps of white meat quickly shrunk like melting ice. He estimated that if he continued to burn for a few more minutes, these things would completely disappear. But he didn't do so. He didn't come here to kill these ice worms, but to capture them. As the ice worms were dismembered one after another, Dean walked towards the giant black tree from the ground. His eyes were golden, and his X-ray vision was completely activated. He was on guard against any possibility of changes. The minced meat of the extreme ice insects was slowly reassembling, but it required time. This period of time was enough for him to fight with this thing that he suspected to be the extreme ice insect king. This black giant tree was not a real tree. It had a complex structure inside, like a living being, but it did not have a heart, digestive organs, and other organs. However, there was something like blood flowing in its body, and most of this blood flowed into the snow-white giant worm, and then it was extracted from the giant worm's body, cycling back and forth. It's a pity. If you had a human body, you could still communicate with me. I could only use violence to make you listen to me. Dean stood in front of the giant black tree. He felt the branches around him tremble slightly. The roots of the giant tree were also trembling slightly. It seemed that it couldn't bear the high temperature. He expressed sympathy, and then both of his hands turned into cutting blades and shot out. Puff! The sharp blades pierced into the giant black tree. Through long-range touch, Dean's perception extended out of the flame. He could feel a burst of coldness. Suddenly, a shrill scream came from the top of the tree. The scream was extremely high in decibels and pierced the eardrums. Dean's hair stood up, and his ear bones shrank. He lowered the sound and looked at the source of the sound. It was coming from the body of the snow-white giant worm. It had woken up. The middle of the snow-white giant worm's body slightly opened, revealing a huge, strange mouth. When the mouth split open, the whole body was divided into two. The degree of opening would make any snake feel ashamed. Galigi. Suddenly, a burst of strange sounds came out of the snow-white giant worm's mouth. Dean was puzzled, but the thing that came out of its mouth made him stunned. Human, please stop. It was the common language of the giant wall, and it was spoken very fluently. It was very magnetic and charming. Human, please stop. At this time, the snow-white giant worm said the same words again, but this time in a different language. It was the English of the old era. Dean was still in a daze. Then the giant worm taught Dean what a language master was. Russian, Spanish, and a small language of a certain country in Africa. 7 or 8 languages were spoken. Dean had never heard of some of them. Finally, it started to talk about the Chinese language. Dean could not help but ask, "What are you?" The snow-white giant worm saw that Dean finally responded. It seemed to be relieved and immediately said in a magnetic Chinese accent, "We don't mean to hurt you here. Please let us go and leave here." Dean could not help but ask, "Why did you say our language? Did you read it from the carrier's memory?" The snow-white giant worm repeated the words above, and the tone did not change. It was like a machine. Dean could not help but repeat his question, but the snow-white giant worm was still repeating his words. He could not help but be annoyed. "What the hell are you? Why did you say our language? If you don't answer me properly, I won't let you have the opportunity to kneel down." His words seemed to have an effect. The snow-white giant insect opened its mouth as if it was in a daze or trying to organize the meaning of his words. After a while, it said, "Human, in your language, we are called extreme ice insects. We are the ancestors of the parasitic soul insects that you use to increase your strength. We don't mean to offend you. We hope that you can let us go. We are hiding here because we don't want to be found by you." Dean was startled. He squinted his eyes and said, "So you are the Ice Worm King? You can say that." The snow-white giant worm admitted very simply. Dean was not excited. Instead, he was very calm. He found that this Ice Worm King seemed to be a veteran. It not only knew the languages of the old era, but also the language of the giant wall. It also knew the names that humans gave to them. Just these were enough to show that it had experienced a lot of things, and it was very likely that it had lived from the old era until now. 300 years of lifespan was out of reach for humans, but it might not be a problem for the ice worms that had a tenacious vitality. However, the behavior of the Ice Worm King was a bit strange. It was too honest. It did not hide anything from it. It was reasonable to say that it knew so many languages of the old era and knew the situation of the Giant Wall era. It should have been in contact with many humans and learned from them. But since it could get this knowledge, it should have learned the cunning and cautiousness of humans. It should not be so honest. Soon, Dean understood why the Ice Worm King was so honest. Perhaps it intended to let him know that it was the Ice Worm King. With Dean's current strength, the next level was the king level of the abyss. The possibility to continue to become stronger was to absorb the Ice Worm King. Once he had this idea and absorbed it, it was equal to giving it the opportunity to control him. If it was any other abyss, it would be ecstatic, Dean thought in his heart. If it was any other abyss, it would be very happy. Unfortunately, he knew a lot of secrets about the king level from beyond a lookout, so he did not intend to rely on the Ice Worm King to become the king level. Dean felt that he was aware of the Ice Worm King's trick, but he did not immediately kill it. Instead, he said with a bit of joy on his face, "How long have you been hiding here?" The Ice Worm King replied very quickly, "It's been a long time. I can't remember." It was a very vague answer, but also impeccable. Dean smiled. "How do you know our human language?" He was asking the obvious. The Ice Worm King seemed to hesitate for a moment. "I need the blood of other creatures to maintain my life. My children accidentally caught you humans when they were hunting prey, so I learned it from them." It was a very honest answer, but it concealed the specific content. Dean smiled his heart as if he was watching the prey being caught step by step. "This is your spaceship. Are you from another planet?" Spaceship was the name of the Earth, but Dean believed that it could understand as it could read the human memory. The Ice Worm King answered very quickly, and its tone was also very sincere. "We passed through here, but unexpectedly ran out of energy and fell here. Because of this, we had some wars with you. But please believe that we absolutely did not offend you. We will leave here once we find energy." Dean's heart was a bit shaken when he saw that it admitted that it was an alien creature. As a person of the old era, he was like all the people of the old era. From childhood, he had fantasized about the existence of other life forms in the dark and silent universe. He had also fantasized about the appearance of aliens, thin heads, huge eyes. But he did not expect that the alien life form that finally appeared on Earth would be this huge, fat, and not cute monster worm in front of him. The reason why it was not cute was because of the slender blades that the latter had retracted to the back of its body and its mouth full of sharp teeth. It made people shudder. At this point, he could finally confirm that the disaster of the old era was caused by the invasion of alien monsters. Although he had some speculations before, and even believed that it was because he had seen some reports on TV before he went into hibernation. But at that time, he was still young and hadn't seen the news about the arrival of alien monsters. Later on, he grew up in Sylvia and came into contact with many dark things. He was a bit skeptical about everything. Occasionally, he would even think that this thing was secretly created by the old countries with the purpose of reshuffling the power structure of the old era. This kind of fantasy continued until now, and it was finally 100% confirmed. But was the reason for their visit to the Earth really because they were passing by on the way and their energy was exhausted? Dean naturally didn't believe it, but he didn't expose it. After all, he didn't have any reference. Even if he tortured it, he may not get the truth. If the other side insisted on a statement or changed to another wrong statement, then he could only believe it. But now it was different. He could induce it to say things that were half true and half false, and then extract the information that he believed to be true. "Why did you pass through here?" Dean asked. The extreme ice insect king was silent for a while before saying, "Maybe it's because we're too lonely. For millions of years, we've been the only ones on our planet, so we're preparing to search for new life partners in the universe. Originally, we were planning to go to another planet, but we happened to pass by here and discovered you guys. Furthermore, because of the language barrier, a war broke out. This is something we didn't want to happen either." "To another planet?" "It's not a planet, but an area, because we detected that there was a special signal coming from that area. It seems that there is life there, so we went there." "So, you didn't land because you ran out of energy, but because you discovered our planet." Dean caught the loophole in its words, but he felt that it deliberately let him catch it. In fact, there are two parts of the reason. We didn't have much energy, so we found you, so we landed." Ice Worm King's tone was a bit awkward. but only its mouth was moving on its smooth body. Dean couldn't see its expression. Dean sneered and pretended to be angry, but there was some doubt in his heart. It mentioned that there was a life signal in another area, but he didn't know whether it was true or false. If it was true, then there were other life in the universe. If it was false, then the original target of these monsters was the Earth. They must have detected the signal that the Earth had projected into the universe, so they specifically came. In the olden era, when humans developed aerospace technology, they never stopped searching for extraterrestrials. Many scientists and famous science fiction writers had mentioned that when humans found extraterrestrials, they might not be able to avoid a disaster. Either humans were weak and oppressed, or they were colonized and ruled by humans, or if they found extraterrestrials weaker than humans, they would be colonized and ruled by humans. No matter what the result was, it was not good for humans and alien races. But humans still didn't stop this fanatical and dangerous action, and always persisted in looking for extraterrestrial creatures. Some people said that it was because humans were too lonely in the vast universe. But if you're lonely, then you're lonely. Can you not die? Dean felt that if his guess was true, this ice worm king could simply press the faces of those knowledgeable, fanatical intellectuals to the ground and rub them. After thinking for a moment, Dean felt that the second possibility was more likely. These insects were coming for the Earth. Otherwise, it was impossible for them to sense the existence of life in other star areas, but not the Earth's existence. They came over to start a war, and obviously it was not a good move. Just like the two results, they swallowed humans and ruled the weak. All life had a common characteristic, and that was the need for survival. Humans needed food, beasts needed prey. Even a tree needed water to nourish it, which was absorbed from the surrounding environment. Obviously, this was a very cliché, fundamental reason. These monsters took a fancy to the Earth's resources and environment. Of course, there was another reason that was less likely, and that was that they were bloodthirsty and liked to kill, so they found the Earth. Chapter 1039. The Iceworm King was silent. It was like an insect that didn't understand human language. Dean wasn't in a hurry. He just quietly looked at it. His golden pupils could see the internal structure of the Iceworm King's body. It was white and flawless. It was more beautiful than snow. It was hard to imagine that such a pure and clean body structure would be such an ugly insect. Perhaps it was beautiful, but he couldn't appreciate it. There was only a sticky sound in the silent hall. The surrounding ice worms that were cut into pieces crawled and slowly gathered. One or two of them had recovered most of their bodies and were crawling towards Dean. "Are you trying to stall for time?" Dean opened his mouth. The Iceworm King seemed to wake up suddenly. No. I'll let them retreat to the side so that they won't die in vain." After that, the ice worms that were crawling towards Dean suddenly stopped. They looked up at the Iceworm King on the giant black tree. Then they turned their heads and slowly crawled to the dark corner at the edge of the hall. Dean glanced at them, but didn't say anything. The confidence in his heart made him feel that these ice worms weren't a threat. Even if all of their bodies were healed, he could still cut them again. It would be effortless. Origami, the Iceworm King sighed. It pulled Dean's thoughts back to the Iceworm King. They're also extraterrestrial creatures. They're the creatures that I mentioned before in the star region that released unknown life signals. They have also found the Earth. However, they're different from us. Their planet is lacking in resources, and they are plundering everywhere. They are bloodthirsty and brutal by nature. Moreover, they need to constantly devour other living creatures in order to maintain their own lives. You call them origami. This name was originally given by our race. However, it only has one word, origami. The symbolic meaning of this name is very simple. Wherever the origami passes, there's only barren land. No life can escape from their hands. They won't even let an ant go. However, slowly, they were worshipped as gods by you. Origami, There was a bit of bitterness in the Iceworm King's voice. Dean was startled. He didn't expect that the situation would turn like this. So, it wasn't lying before? Were they really just passing by the Earth? But how could they explain that they did not notice Earth in advance? His heart was full of doubts, and he could not confirm whether it was true or not. After all, the Ice Insect King said that the origami were bloodthirsty and cruel, and that they devoured other creatures. It reminded him of the origami's flesh that he had seen before, and the situation after he ate the origami's flesh. Indeed, the origami gene had a strong devouring ability. He felt that the reason why his body could absorb the power of other magic marks was most likely because of the origami gene. However, under Crimson Moon's experiments, the berserk nature of this origami gene had been neutralized, so it did not pose much of a threat to him. However, he still did not dare to remove the uranium ring. He needed further experiments to confirm it. So, the war with the humans were all origami? Dean asked deliberately. The Iceworm King said, "Not all of them. Back then, the main enemy of you humans was us. These origami were just hiding in the dark, intensifying the conflict between us and the humans. Although they were cruel and bloodthirsty, their IQ was very high, and they were extremely cunning. They instigated us to start a war with you humans, and then they reaped the benefits. Unfortunately, no one saw this at that time. Until the end, when they showed up, everything was revealed, but it was too late. At that time, the humans were already ready to perish together with us, and they launched the strongest world-destroying plan." Dean was stunned. First, he did not expect it to admit that it was the enemy of the humans. Second, he was suddenly not sure whether what it said was true or false. Dean's mind stopped for a moment, and he suddenly reacted. He was secretly shocked. No matter if what the Iceworm King said was true or false, it could already shake his mind. This was not something that could be moved by a simple honesty. So, you and our ancestors were fooled. Then why did the giant wall and the empire appear in the end? And why do we call them origami? Dean asked thoughtfully. The Iceworm King was silent for a moment and slowly said, "I don't know why the giant wall appeared. At that time, the humans launched the world-destroying plan, and we had to temporarily avoid it. I have been here for a very long time, and I have never left, and I can't leave. The situation outside that I know is from the human explorers who came here one after another, and I caught them. I searched the memory fragments. I only know the current appearance of the world, but I don't know the history in the middle. But my guess is that origami used despicable means to cover up its crimes, and instead threw all the crimes to our clan. Then, in the name of helping the humans, they ruled the humans, but in fact, they were just raising humans. After all, their clan likes to kill and devour, but if all the creatures are plundered, they will also perish. So raising humans is the best way. You humans have excellent reproductive ability, and if you control the killing, you can use it for many years." Dean frowned. Was it really like this? He couldn't distinguish it. The Iceworm King's words were methodical, and he couldn't find fault with it. The only thing he could guess and confirm was that it should be hiding some other things. But the main thing that it said had no loopholes, and the possibility was extremely high. Even if it didn't say it, Dean may speculate like this. Raising, killing. Dean thought of the towering giant wall, and his heart suddenly burst into a burst of cold. This giant wall that was thousands of meters high was obviously not the work of humans. Did they build such a giant wall just to shelter humans? He suddenly thought of the pigs, dogs, cows, and sheep raised by humans, and his face couldn't help but slightly change. Humans use guardrails to raise pigs and sheep, but wasn't it to protect them? They were worried that they would run outside and be caught and slaughtered by others. But if they continued to stay in the guardrails, sooner or later they would be slaughtered by the masters who sheltered them. Was the ultimate fate of the residents inside the giant wall like this? Dean thought about it and felt that it was not right. He had been a master of the Sylvia Wall for many years, but he had never heard of unknown forces or characters that captured or slaughtered a large number of people. Occasionally, there would be large-scale casualties because of the improper disposal of the bodies of the refugees and the piling up of the corpses of rats in the streets, which caused plague and other disasters. If it is hidden, no, I have read the secret files, and they're the most confidential things inside the giant wall. It is impossible that there is no record in the files, unless the master of the wall and the origami are from the same nest. Dean frowned, and suddenly he thought that he had overlooked one thing. The origami are dead, so they died after building the giant wall, so they didn't have the time to carry out the plan. But soon this idea was overturned by him. He felt that the origami shouldn't be extinct from this world. After all, as the last big winner, the origami, how could they be extinct? If the origami existed, and raising humans was their purpose, then the event of human being slaughtered would inevitably be recorded. Don't ignore some of the great people who survived the dogma and justice, and their beliefs were beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Whether it was a great person or a sinner, when they reached a certain height, the firm belief they had to pay was the same. Dean raised the doubts in his heart to the Iceworm King to see its reaction and answer. I don't know, maybe it happened, but you don't know after all they did it, they wouldn't be so blatant and cause panic. Humans can unscrupulously pick a lamb from the flock and slaughter it. They don't care about the thoughts of other sheep, because humans think that these sheep have no intelligence, but you humans obviously know the fear of intelligent life, so they won't do that. The Iceworm King thought for a moment and said, "It is also possible that they said that they picked from different giant wall, so they wouldn't gather in one giant wall to harvest. Wouldn't harvest in one giant wall." Dean's eyes flashed. Was it because Sylvia was too weak, so such activities were only carried out in the Empire? After thinking for a moment, he felt that he couldn't distinguish the truth from the lies, so he temporarily put down the matter. He couldn't continue to be led by the nose by the Iceworm King in front of him, so I can also inquire about the things that you know. In that case, it seems that you have no value. The Iceworm King didn't seem to expect that Dean would suddenly turn against him, but soon it anxiously said, "Everything I said to you is true. I didn't hide anything from you, but I really don't know about other things. How about this? I tell you the way to continue to become stronger and give you my children. They will unconditionally accept you." Dean slightly sneered. "Even if they resist, do they have the ability?" "This." The Iceworm King was a little disappointed. "What do you want?" "I don't want anything. You and your children belong to me." Dean's eyes flashed, and the corner of his mouth revealed a smile. "You seem to have forgotten that I'm the Abyss. The way for a human to become the Abyss is to eat your children to further strengthen their physique. But it's not enough to rely on your children. If I can eat you, I should be able to reach the peak of the human race." The Iceworm King angrily said, You said that you won't hurt me. How come I don't remember?" Dean sneered. "You can resist or obey. It's up to you. But it's better to persuade you to be obedient so that you won't suffer. If you perform well, I may leave one for your children, and it won't be considered as exterminating you." The Iceworm King was so angry that he screamed. For a time, the languages of different countries and different races burst out. Dean quietly listened to the scene, and even had some amazement and appreciation. He had never heard the scene of multi-language cursing. Moreover, he had never seen the acting skills of an insect that could soar to such a high level. Unfortunately, the old era was broken, and there was no way to receive the Oscar. After cursing for a few minutes, the Iceworm King gradually managed his own language system, and angrily said to Dean in Chinese, "You bastard, you humans are despicable, shameless, greedy, selfish race. You deserve to be imprisoned by Huang, and you deserve to recognize the thief as your father. It's recognizing the thief as God." Dean corrected. This also implied that he believed what it said earlier. The Iceworm King angrily scolded, "Despicable, shameless." Chinese is broad and profound, and it's the highest language on our side, but you have only learned a few curse words. It's really... Dean shook his head, indicating that the child could not be taught. The Iceworm King was stunned. Apparently, he found that compared with the purebred earthlings, he was a few streets behind in terms of cursing. "You have to keep your word this time." The Iceworm King seemed to be gnashing his teeth as he said, "Of course, I don't need your child when I reach the bottleneck anyway. Dean said, as if it was a matter of course. The Iceworm King was silent for a long time and finally agreed. Dean was also relieved. He felt that he should also get an Oscar. Oh no, one might not be enough. He should get a dozen. By the way, why was the door of the spaceship closed when I came in? It didn't seem like this the last time I came. Dean thought of the previous strange opening of the door and immediately asked. The Extreme Ice Insect King said weakly, "The spaceship has recovered some of its energy, so I asked my child to close it. I wanted to rest and recuperate in peace, but who knew?" At this point, it seemed to have suddenly realized something. Two black eyeballs protruded out of its snow-white fat body. They were the size of soybeans and were very hidden. "You, how did you open the door?" "It opened by itself." Dean frowned. "Tell me honestly, is there anything else here?" The Iceworm King seemed to be jumping, and its voice suddenly increased by an octave. "The door opened by itself? How is it possible? My children are here, and without my permission, they can't open the door." Dean looked at it, and suddenly wasn't sure whether it was acting this time, but it seemed to be a bit real. Was it really not opened by it? Or was there something hidden here that it didn't know about? If it was, then that thing opened the door and used him to come over. Thinking of this, Dean's whole body hair stood up, and he vigilantly looked at the darkness around him. The door opened by itself. If you're hiding, then don't blame me for being angry. If you're not hiding, then it is estimated that there is something you don't know about here. Moreover, it can control the spaceship. The Iceworm King wanted to say that Dean had just turned hostile, so what was so strange about it? However, Dean's words made it nervous all of a sudden. Its black eyeballs quickly turned, and it looked around. It knew that Dean didn't seem to be lying, and there was no reason for him to deliberately say so. If the door really opened by itself, there was really King hell. In the quiet and dark hall, Dean could only hear the sound of his own breathing. He tried to expand his perception to the extreme and wanted to sense the surroundings, but many passages couldn't be explored, and the range of perception was limited. Within his perception range, there was nothing. Chapter 1040. Follow me out of here. Dean didn't continue to stay and immediately ordered the Iceworm King. His original plan was to explore the spaceship after subduing the iceworms. He hoped to find some removable technology to carry back. After all, this was the technology of the demonic worms. Even some small things could bring a huge boost to human technology. However, the strange opening of the spaceship's hatch wasn't done by the iceworms. The thing hiding in the dark could hide from the Iceworm King and control the spaceship. Most of them were unimaginable existences. The only way was to leave this place as soon as possible. Even without Dean's words, the Iceworm King was planning to leave immediately. It was frightened by Dean's words. This spaceship was its territory, and the hatch was opened without its permission. This feeling was like a girl who found out that there was a strong man in her boudoir. And it was a masked man soon. The Iceworm King dragged its snow-white fat body down from the black giant tree. Its body seemed to have suction cups that allowed it to climb straight down the tree. At this moment, the extreme ice insects in the dark also quickly gathered and guarded around the Extreme Ice Insect King. "Let's go." The Iceworm King was afraid that Dean would misunderstand, so he quickly said. Dean said in a cold voice, "Let them follow you. I'll find you first if anyone is left out." "I know." The Iceworm King smiled bitterly. It knew that Dean was worried that it would secretly send its children to sneak into other places to control the spaceship and let them escape. Unfortunately, the energy of the spaceship was limited. Even if it had this idea, it would be very laborious. Moreover, Dean was aware of this possibility. Moreover, it felt that even if it sent a child to sneak into the command room, it would be killed by the strange existence in the dark. Since the latter could control the hatch, it was obvious that it was standing in the command room and observing every move through the monitor screen. Dean counted the number of iceworms. There were 13 iceworms. Including the Iceworm King, there were 14 in total. This harvest was enough to make countless people jealous. 13 iceworms could create 13 abyssal powerhouses. Unfortunately, they were only lower abyssal powerhouses. Dean sighed in his heart. Suddenly, he thought that the Iceworm King called them children. Then wouldn't it be able to breed ice worms? This is a golden hen that lays eggs. Dean's eyes lit up. The Iceworm King suddenly felt a chill on its back. It turned its bean-sized eyes to look back, but it saw Dean smiling at it. It suddenly felt a chill, and its heart was inexplicably flustered. But then it thought that Dean might know the way to the king. Its heart was suddenly excited, and its fat body moved forward more vigorously. Whoosh, whoosh. The Extreme Ice Insect King led the group of extreme ice insects to crawl forward. These extreme ice insects were agile, but the Extreme Ice Insect King's body was huge, and its movements were slow. It was like a caterpillar that was bloated, and it relied on its abdominal muscles to move forward. Soon, the Extreme Ice Insect King came to the cabin door that should have been closed. After a careful observation, it found that there were no traces of fighting around the cabin door, and there were no signs of damage. When it passed by, it looked through the gap of the cabin door and saw that the cabin door was still shrinking inside. It was shocked again, and it squirmed forward more and more urgently. However, even though it was squirming at full speed, the surrounding scenery was moving backward at the speed of a tortoise. Dean maintained the normal walking speed and followed behind. Looking at the Extreme Iceworm King moving forward, he felt strange. Was this guy deliberately stalling for time? He didn't urge it, and was ready to continue to observe for a while. Soon, he saw it speed up, and the fat of its whole body trembled. Its body arched vigorously, and it squirmed forward. However, its speed only increased from walking to walking. Was this guy a tortoise? Dean slightly raised his eyebrows. He could see that this guy was working hard, but it was moving. Shaking his head, Dean shouted, "If you can't walk, then let your children carry you." The Extreme Iceworm King reacted, "Yes." After saying that, it was a little embarrassed and immediately let the children next to it lift it. Whoosh! After the 7 or 8 extreme ice worms lifted it up, it quickly ran forward and disappeared. Dean and the rest of the extreme ice worms quickly followed, and in the blink of an eye, they came to the exit of the spaceship. The Extreme Iceworm King took Dean to the emergency passage of the spaceship. There was a bottomless pool here, and the pool led to the lake outside. The Extreme Iceworm King said something to Dean, and then took the lead to jump in. The rest of the extreme ice worms quickly followed. Dean also entered the lake, and saw 7 or 8 extreme ice worms pushing the Extreme Iceworm King forward like a propeller, and quickly rushed out. After bypassing the passage, they came to the lake outside. Several extreme ice worms suddenly released a large amount of cold air, and the lake quickly froze. The cold ice spread to the surroundings. Dean's body released flames to dispel the cold air around him, and quickly approached the Extreme Iceworm King. I'm not attacking you. I just want to speed up and leave," the Extreme Iceworm King said in a panic. Dean knew that the Extreme Iceworm King didn't have the guts to use this trick to attack him, but he still put on an angry posture. He raised his hand to cut off several extreme ice worms, and then drilled out of the frozen lake. It's young master. Young master. Young master, aren't you? Dean raised his hand to interrupt the crowd. Tell Noyce and the others to gather here in 3 days. Tell them that I'm back and get ready for the meeting. The doubts in the hearts of the guards receded as they heard Dean mention Noyce's name. After all, it wasn't difficult to disguise as someone else. They were worried that Dean was a fake. One of Aurora's confidants courageously came forward and asked about Dean's departure. He also asked about the names of the elders. Dean didn't get angry, but didn't answer. He directly released the splitter. Everyone immediately believed him. The young man who had mustered up the courage to ask was trembling with fear, and his face was filled with terror. Dean patted his shoulder. It's good to be cautious. The youth felt like he was going to collapse. Was he being praised? He looked up and saw the envious eyes of the others. 3 days later, Noyce, Sergei, and the others came with a group of confidants. They also brought Peter and Black Mage. Both of them had been following Noyce. They didn't expect Dean to come back so soon. They were secretly glad that they didn't fight back and kill Dean's people. After inquiring about the situation during this period of time, Dean was relieved to see that there was no big trouble. He asked, "How's the money? Can we buy 5 legendary soul worms?" Noyce knew that Dean intended to cultivate their strength. He blushed as he heard Dean's question. "Master, we haven't had time to raise money. I estimate that we can only raise the money for 1 legendary soul worm." A legendary soul worm was also very valuable. Duddian knew that time was really tight, and their identity was sensitive, so he didn't dare to use other means to earn gray income. After all the ways to make money quickly had already been written in the criminal case of the magistrate. Dean inquired about their respective circles and occupations. After everyone had finished speaking, he asked the Black Mage and Peter to help refer to them. Together with his own judgment, he picked out 7 or 8 circles that could make money quickly. Among them, the most profitable circle should be the wizard circle that Edward had mixed into. As long as one could create high-level witchcraft or high-grade magic tools, they could make a lot of money. But it was difficult for the people who were born and raised in the Giant Wall. Their thinking and cognition had long been limited. This was the limitation of the environment. If they wanted to break the cocoon and become a butterfly, they needed talent. However, it was a piece of cake for someone like Dean who had seen different sceneries. He intended to let Edward rise quickly. He asked him to wait in the conference room, and then selected a person from the group. It was Noy's confidant, Amelia. She was in her early 20s, but looked as cute as a young girl. She had mixed into the music circle. Chapter 1041. After all, she was not a child. She immediately thought of the money that could be generated and the connections that could be extended, so she immediately agreed. After she agreed, she suddenly thought that the method was good, but what about the music? Was he going to copy the movements of the masters from Sylvia? This was indeed a good idea. However, even though she liked to listen to the performances of famous masters when she was depressed, she could not remember the movements of these masters. She could only roughly hum a few melodies, but it was impossible for her to remember the entire piece. After all, when she went to the concert, she had the mood to enjoy, not to learn or record. In this kind of mentality, even if she listened 8 or 10 times, she could only remember a few favorite melodies. Dean saw her puzzled expression, took out the book from the side, dipped the quill in ink, and wrote quickly. The notes fluttered on the tip of his nose, as if they were going to fly out of the book. In the dimly lit room, there was only the sound of the quill brushing on the snow-white paper and Edward and Amelia's breathing. Amelia looked at the notes jumping out of the quill pen, quickly filling a page, and then turning to a new page. She was completely stunned. Her mouth was open for a long time, but she didn't speak. After recovering, she immediately closed her mouth, for fear of making a sound that would disturb Dean's train of thought and break the quill in his hand. Half an hour later, Dean closed the book. The ink on the book had already dried up, even on the last page. The ability to control the temperature brought by the Sun Beast's magic mark allowed him to dry the ink when he pressed the paper with his fingertips. However, the paper did not ignite. This was his control. Consider it yourself, and maximize the value as much as possible. Dean handed the book to her. Amelia quickly took it with both hands, bowed, and nodded. Then she heard Dean ask her to leave first, so she bowed again, respectfully left the room, and closed the door. Amelia took a deep breath and exhaled softly. Her footsteps were silent as she left the hallway outside the room. Only when she reached the stairs did she slow down. She slowly flipped open the book and saw that it was filled with musical notes that were drawn beautifully. The first movement had a name on it, Moonlight Lover. This was a famous piece of music in Sylvia. Almost all well-off lovers would listen to it when they were confessing their love or dating their first love. Some who could not afford to attend a concert would choose a restaurant where Moonlight Lover was played. They would eat the exquisite dishes and listen to the imitation version of Moonlight Lover. From this, it could be seen how classic and commercial this piece of music was. Amelia's eyes were full of surprise. She didn't expect Dean to be able to memorize this movement. She had heard it many times, but it was almost impossible for her to memorize it. She flipped through the pages quickly. 7 or 8 pages later, there was the second movement. It was another famous movement by Sylvia. Amelia quickly flipped to the back. The third, the fourth, all of them. Does he read music when he has nothing to do? Amelia was surprised. She knew how busy their work was. They didn't have much time for entertainment. How could he do such a boring thing? Amelia went downstairs in amazement. She met a few of her companions and greeted them. She knew that Dean didn't specifically tell her how to operate it. It was a test of her ability. If this matter was done well, then she would be put in an important position in the future. At least she would be promoted from one of Noyce's confidants. If she could work directly with Dean, then her status would be even more different. However, she didn't want to have direct contact with Dean. She preferred to stay with Noyce. It would be better if she could see this man every day. After sending Amelia away, Dean leaned back in his chair and rested for a while. Memorizing so many movements at once was a bit of a burden on his brain. Although his memory was close to photographic, the human brain was still a human brain, not a machine. It was impossible for him to record 100%. Many fragments needed him to think deeply, recall, and constantly dig before he could remember again. Dean called Edward and began to teach him the new invention. Edward studied very seriously. Today, he felt that he had once again seen the learned side of his teacher. Apart from the complicated magic, he actually understood the art of music. Moreover, he was strong and young. He felt that his teacher was a genius that was rarely seen in 100 years. He was smarter than anyone he had ever met, so he respected him and studied very carefully. 2 days later, Dean, Noyce, Sergei, and others gathered again. This time they were asked to choose the first person to be the ruler. Noyce, Sergei, Barton, and others were stunned as they heard this. In the past, Dean had directly appointed them, but this time they had to choose by themselves. They weren't used to it. However, they decided to choose Noyce under Dean's order. The reason for choosing Noyce was very simple. He had been with Dean for the longest time. He was trusted by Dean the most and would never betray Dean. Moreover, he was the smartest among them. As early as the time when Dean left, Noyce showed some of Dean's shadow. He planned strategies and controlled the situation in an orderly manner. He helped many people to retreat. Now, they needed to gain a foothold in the giant wall. Many things needed a smart person to come forward. Noyce was undoubtedly the most involved person. If he had the corresponding strength, then many things would be easy to do. Dean had expected this result. He was also the most optimistic about Noyce. Although Macon was a childhood friend and had experienced several life and death tribulations, but Macon's character wasn't suitable to control the overall situation. Sometimes he was impulsive and didn't see the overall situation well. Barton was too calm, so it was easy to miss opportunities. Aurora was too young. Her fighting talent was surprisingly high, but it was difficult to convince people in terms of management. Noyce, you don't need to shirk. Dean made a decision. Noyce smiled in response. He knew Dean's temperament. Dean didn't like to be polite or indecisive. Dean handed the book to Noyce so that he could choose a favorite legendary monster. In the past, Noyce served as his poison tester. Now that Noyce has been honed, it would be a waste to let him continue to be a poison tester. Moreover, he doesn't need him to help him test poisons anymore. He can even digest poisons that can kill Noyce. Noyce saw Dean's eyes. He knew that Dean was ready to let him take charge. He was a little excited, a little regretful, and a little sad, but he hid it. He took a deep breath and turned the pages. He looked at each legendary magic mark ability seriously, estimating the suitable place for this ability. He knew that this time he didn't need to choose an auxiliary ability, but a strong comprehensive ability or an extremely strong ability in a certain part. This one's Soul Finder. Noyce pointed at one of the books after turning a few pages. Dean took a look. The Soul Caller was ranked 7th among the legendary monsters. 3-star legendary. Its main ability was to interfere with the enemy's spirit through a special induction, ignore the body's defense, in addition to hear the whispers of the dead and communicate with the undead. Was he undead? According to the scientific explanation of the old era, it was a kind of energy in the human body. It could be understood as an electromagnetic field. But no one could answer this explanation. Even though humans could see hundreds of light years away from the universe, but they couldn't answer whether humans had a soul or what it was. But the ability of Soul Finder could do this kind of unexplainable thing. It was like many things that humans could do by instinct, but they couldn't explain the principle and why. The ability of magic marks was the ability of a living creature. It could do it, but it couldn't be explained. Are you sure? Dean looked at him. Noise chose the road, so he didn't interfere. Noise nodded seriously. Master, this is what I want. Good. Duddian nodded. This ability was very good for Noise. Moreover, he felt that Noise should have inquired about the price of magic marks in advance. The price of the Soul Finder wasn't expensive and was still within the affordable range. It wouldn't take a long time to raise money to buy all 5 of them. 1.5 months later, Noise absorbed 5 Soul Finder and successfully strengthened his magic marks. He got the qualifications to become a master. As for God's Marrows, the price was thousands of times cheaper than magic marks. Noise had already stored a lot of them for him to directly absorb. Everyone worked together to raise money for 1.5 months to buy 5 legendary parasitic soul worms. This speed of earning money was already quite terrifying. After all, they did not touch the forbidden area. Although there was a lot of gray income, this gray income was within the scope of the rules. For example, the betting in the arena, the sale of Edward's witchcraft, Amelia selling the movement but went back on her words. She used the recording of the transaction to blackmail and get a lot of compensation. When one's strength reached a certain level, it was really a matter of time to make money. Dean took out an ice worm and helped Noise absorb it. Soon, Noise jumped from the master to the abyss. It only took him 1.5 months. Dean was relieved. Noise's current strength was enough to subdue Peter and the Dark Magician. He could withdraw now. But before leaving, there was still a problem to solve. It was the ice worms. He planned to leave the ice worms to Noise and let him distribute them. However, the fighting power of the extreme ice insects was comparable to that of the lower abyss, which was comparable to Noise. If Noise magic marks were the sun beast, which specialized in restraining the extreme ice insects, he might be able to subdue a dozen extreme ice insects with the power of the lower abyss, or even the extreme ice insect king. But this was only if. Master, are you going to leave? Noise found Dean on the 2nd day after he became the abyss. After a night of excitement, he felt the sadness of parting. Dean saw Noise come to his office. He sighed in his heart. The person who had followed him for the longest time really knew him well. Yes, I'm going to the south to see the results of the war. Noise was startled. He wanted to say that there was nothing to see, but soon he thought that Dean wouldn't do things without benefits. It was possible that Dean didn't go to the south just to watch the war. He had other plans. He sighed and said, "Young master, isn't this too dangerous? Is there anything I can help you with?" He felt powerless as he said the second half of the sentence. He knew that he couldn't keep Dean. "Help me take care of them and yourself." Dean smiled. "Danger is a common thing. I'm not used to doing things that aren't dangerous." Noise's mouth twitched. He felt that the joke was a bit cold. 7 days later, Dean left the giant wall. He waved goodbye to Noise, Barton, Sergei, and others. He handed over the matter to Noise. The remaining 12 ice worms were given to Noise. The Ice Worm King was imprisoned in a flaming coffin. He found that the Ice Worm King's flame resistance was as bad as the ice worms. The temperature of the flaming coffin was high enough to form a cage. The only problem was that the fire couldn't be extinguished. It needed to be kept in the furnace all the time. Moreover, it needed to be guarded. However, Dean and Noise made another preparation. In case the Ice Worm King broke out of the coffin, then it would expose this place to the lords of the giant wall. Even if they couldn't catch the Ice Worm King, then it would set off a storm of blood. The power of the giant wall would be greatly weakened. It would be convenient for Noise and others to rise up. Once again, he traveled alone in the wilderness, embarking on a new journey towards the south. Dean walked and stopped along the way. The abyss was once a dangerous area, but now was no different from the pioneering area. Occasionally he would encounter an abyss-level monster, but it was just a warm-up. It added a bit of fun to the monotonous journey. Along the way, Dean saw a lot of post-disaster sceneries. There were still remnants of human products on the broken embankment. In the wilderness, there were occasional high-speed trains that looked like giant snakes, but the carriages had long been crooked. There were only a few undeads wandering around. Dean arrived in the south after a month. Through his omnidirectional perception, he saw a few hidden sentries before he arrived at the southern Battle God Wall. He secretly went over to finish them off and plundered the map and food. Chapter 1042. Dean wrote down the map and rolled it up. Then he went to the other sentries. "Tell me, what's the situation in the front?" A sentinel hiding in the grass and rocks was subdued and interrogated by Dean. The sentinel was scared by Dean, who suddenly sneaked in. He didn't have time to resist. Dean's sharp arm was pressed against his forehead. The skin between his eyebrows had been cut. The pain made him realize how sharp the blade was. However, the sentinel didn't give in. Although he didn't read any books, he knew that since Dean attacked him, he was the enemy of the Empire. If he compromised, it would be tantamount to treason. The thing that was engraved in his bones from childhood made him decide in an instant that he would rather die than surrender. Dean didn't expect that the sentinel he was going to interrogate would turn out to be a hardbone. But he didn't care. He had encountered such a character too many times before. It didn't take long for the sentinel to kneel in front of Dean. Pain, fear, the torture that pierced the nerves. When the pain was overloaded, his faith didn't play a role in alleviating it. He even completely forgot it at this moment. Soon, Dean dug out the information he wanted from the sentinel's mouth. Relying on the sentinel's statement about the time of the arrival of the Bloodthorn Legion, he judged whether what he said was true or false. After understanding the situation, he released the sentinel who had his limbs cut off and eyes gouged out. Flames emerged from the palm of his hand and stuck to the sentinel's body. Soon, it was burned to ashes, leaving only traces of burning. The sentinel's clothes were neatly piled up next to the body. Dean untied his armor and put on the sentinel's uniform. Then he cleaned up the scene. At the same time, he pinched the bones of his face and molded it into the sentinel's appearance. As for the hair color, he couldn't change it. Fortunately, the sentinel had a military cap. He shaved his hair into a buzz cut and put on the military cap. He learned from the sentinel's appearance and hid in the rocks, waiting for the night to come. At night, a figure quietly lurked and approached. Dean noticed it very early, but didn't move. He saw the figure come closer, look around, and then knock on a rock. Dean used the turtle's magic marks ability to climb out of the rock. He stood up and said in a low voice, "Why are you so late?" The man was less than 30 years old. His skin was rough and dark. After hearing Dudian's words, he angrily stared at him. "Damn, I peed on the road, so I was a little late." Dean snorted, "I'll go back first." The young man waved his hand and quickly drilled into the rock. Dean saw that he didn't expose anything, so his eyes flashed slightly. He turned and left, running along the road that the youth came from. When he reached the end of his field of vision, he continued to follow the youth's scent as a guide. The scent left behind by this young man was very faint, but there were also shallow footprints on the ground that he had deliberately used weeds to pad his feet. As an experienced hunter, these couldn't be hidden from him. Half an hour later, he arrived before a valley. Behind this valley, the towering Battle God Wall could be faintly seen. Under the stars and moon, it was like a huge black beast that occupied the world, exuding a sense of pressure. Here, he was closer to the Battle God Wall. Dean's eyes fell on the valley, and golden light flashed in his eyes. He saw an underground structure in the valley, but it wasn't the well-equipped underground base that he had imagined, but a very simple cave. At this moment, 7 or 8 figures were living in the cave. Some were sleeping, some were chatting, and some were busy reading palm-sized magazines. Found it. There was some calmness in his dark eyes, but also some indifference. Dean took off his sentinel uniform and stood naked in the night. The breeze blew, and his whole body rolled up the spikes of the stone armor. His figure moved, and he quickly jumped into the valley. 10 minutes later, a figure slowly walked out of the valley. He was naked, and half of his chest was stained with blood. He was carrying a bucket of pure water in his hand. He lifted it up and poured it on his head, washing away the blood on his body, and then evaporating the water on the ground. He picked up the sentinel uniform that had fallen on the grass and put it on. After that, he trotted in the direction of the battle god wall, maintaining a moderate speed. Previously, he wasn't able to get the information from the sentinel's mouth. He thought that these sentinels lived on the battle god wall, but he didn't expect that they had a stronghold in the nearby hidden valley. However, now that something had happened here, someone had to report the information to the battle god wall. A moment later, Dean came in front of the battle god wall, took out the whistle from the inner compartment of the sentinel uniform, and blew it. Whoosh! In less than a few minutes, a figure flew down from the battle god wall. There was a pair of huge bird wings on his back, and he looked like an angel. "What's the matter?" The person stopped after descending to a height of 4 or 5 meters above Dean's head. Dean had to look up at him. "Is there a monster attack?" As a sentinel stationed in the battle god wall, although his main responsibility was to guard against people approaching here, but in most cases, basically no one would be stupid enough to sneak attack the battle god wall alone, unless it was those evil heathens of the Empire. Dean quickly said, "Someone sneak attacked us. Is it people?" The contempt in the youth's eyes disappeared and revealed a dignified look. He saw that Dean didn't look like he was lying, and he didn't dare to lie. He pondered for a moment and said, "How many people have run away?" "I don't know. When I returned from my shift, I saw that everyone was dead. But looking at their wounds, it wasn't caused by monsters." Dean immediately said. The youth slightly frowned. He didn't see it with his own eyes and only judged from the wounds. After thinking for a moment, he still believed it, although the other party was just a sentinel. But such a simple judgment shouldn't be wrong. "Come with me." He leaned over and grabbed Dean's shoulder and took him to the battle god wall. "I'll take you to see the brigade commander. You tell her the details of the situation," the youth said in a cold voice. Dean's eyes were attracted by the scene on the God of War's wall. There were 2 or 3 huge battleships like the Bloodthorn Legion that he had seen before. However, they didn't have the emblem of the Bloodthorn King engraved on them. Instead, it had a blood-red vertical pupil. It was very strange. In addition, there were hundreds of small airships that could carry 4 or 5 people. In addition, Dean also saw small fighters, which were almost the same as the fighters of the old era. There were also passenger planes and black boxes like large cargo boxes. Dean was shocked by the technology displayed here, although he had expected it, but he was still a bit surprised to see it with his own eyes. Especially, he saw a few huge white pots with a diameter of 7 or 8 meters. They looked like radio telescopes, but he didn't know whether they were telescopes or wireless signal receiving equipment. There weren't these things on the battle god wall in the east. Did they make them in such a short period of time? Impossible. Even if the technology had exploded, it's impossible to develop so fast in just a few years. Or are they mainly used to deal with the trolls in the south? There were some doubts in Dean's eyes. He quickly thought about it and felt that it should be the case. The fire dragons in the east could fly, so the fighters in the east couldn't exert much combat power. They mainly relied on manpower. After all, in this post-disaster era, the power of mortals was stronger than machines. If that's the case, then the trolls in the south can't fly? Dean guessed in his heart. "Don't look around." The youth who was leading the way shouted, "We are here. Think about what you saw. I'll go and report to the brigade commander." Duddy nodded. The youth went into the tent in front of him and came out after a moment. He shouted to Dean, "Go in." He raised the curtain of the tent. Chapter 1043. Brigadier. Dean took the initiative to call out, but didn't show too much humility. The woman's eyes moved away from the sand table and looked at Dean. She saw that he was neither servile nor overbearing. He seemed to be a bit arrogant. She couldn't help but frown. "I heard that your sentry stronghold was attacked. What's the situation? Tell me in detail. Dean nodded slightly and immediately explained the details of the previous plan. He included his own observations and speculations about the footprints. He added some of his own judgment into it. The enemy attacked within half an hour of my shift. In just half an hour, they were all killed. They were at least at the abyss level. Moreover, it was a fast attack type ability. The enemy didn't cover the traces. It shows that they left in a hurry. Of course, it's also possible that they deliberately left clues in these traces to frame us or lead us to the wrong direction. Palena's indifferent eyes flashed with a trace of light. From the initial indifference, she became slightly serious. She sized up the young man, who kept talking. Apart from his handsome appearance, the latter's temperament and meticulous logical thinking surprised her. Her first impression was that this sentinel was not bad, very outstanding. I know. Palena waited for Dean to finish and lightly said, "The investigation team will think of what you said. You don't need to tell me more." Dean was startled, I know. From the corner of her eyes, she glanced at the sand table behind her. On it was a basin of hills. The surrounding mountains were undulating, and there was a winding river in the middle that surrounded the foot of several mountains. On top of two of the mountains, there were two small green flags. According to the rules of the sand table, they were allies. There were red and black chess pieces on top of the 4 or 5 mountains in front of them. Obviously, red represented the enemy and black represented the unknown area. Palena frowned slightly as she felt the change in Dean's eyes. What? Do you understand? Her voice was cold, and there was a trace of dissatisfaction. After all, this sand table was the layout of the battlefield. It was military intelligence. It wasn't something that a sentry could access. If Dean didn't give her a good impression, she would have directly asked him to get out. A little bit. Dean was very modest, but he didn't want her to think that he was being modest. He immediately continued. If it was me, I would choose to attack from the water route. Water route? Palena couldn't help but coldly snort. A good impression of Dean was destroyed at this moment. You can go out. After that, she turned around and no longer looked at Dean. Attack by water? This idea was indeed a bit earth-shattering and astonishing. If it was proposed by a staff officer who understood military affairs, it might have piqued her curiosity and she would be willing to listen to the details. But when a sentinel said something so ridiculous, she was not the least bit interested. The waterway was a dead end here. If they were to pass by the water, they would have to hunt the monsters in the water first. This alone would cost a lot of soldiers, and there would be no benefits. Dean slightly frowned. He didn't expect that the woman's patience would be so poor. Or rather, his identity didn't allow her to be patient at all. He could only speak his thoughts quickly and briefly. It seems that we will lose a lot of soldiers if we attack by water route. Moreover, it is likely to attract the enemy's attention during the attack. But on the other hand, it is also good. Palena didn't expect that Dean would dare to speak after she dismissed him. She was about to get angry, but when she heard Dean's words, she couldn't help but frown. She had to say that Dean's first words were right. He had pointed out all the weaknesses of the water route. It showed that it wasn't a casual idea, especially the last words that successfully aroused her curiosity. What are the benefits? Palena asked with a frown. Dean was relieved and immediately said, "The enemy won't expect us to attack from the water route. I'm not talking about attacking from the water route, but from underwater." Underwater? Palena was startled. It was as if something exploded in her mind. Her eyes were full of excitement. She had thought of a lot of methods after hearing Dean's words. Moreover, she felt that this idea was very feasible. Dean looked at Palena's flickering face. He didn't say anything and silently stood behind her. 10 minutes later, Palena came to the sand table and looked at it. Her eyes became brighter and brighter as she clapped. Good idea. Dean took advantage of her happiness to remind her of his existence. Congratulations, Brigadier. Palena turned to look at Dean, who was neither servile nor overbearing. She felt that the sentinel was pleasing to the eye. Your idea is very good. There is a probability of it being feasible. What is your name? Dean was relieved. My name is Ryan Dew. Ryan was the surname of the Ryan family in Sylvia. Ryan Dew. Palena nodded. All right, from now on, you'll follow me. How about it? Dean was overjoyed. Thank you, Brigadier. Palena smiled, then suddenly remembered what happened before and immediately said, I'll immediately send an investigation team over to check the situation. I'll definitely let your friends die in peace. Dean was touched. He gritted his teeth. Thank you, Brigadier. It seemed that he had used up all his strength to say these words. Palena was very satisfied with Dean's gratitude. She grabbed the bell on the table and gently shook it. One of the sergeants who was waiting outside the tent came in. Take him to change his clothes. Give him a sergeant's uniform. Palena looked at Dean. You don't have any merits, so I can only give you the rank of sergeant. After the battle is over, your name will be on the merit list. I'll apply to the higher-ups to promote you to my side. You'll follow me to work for me. Dean was moved. Thank you, Brigadier. This was the third time he said the same words, but the context was different. Palena smiled and waved to the sergeant to take Dean away. The sergeant looked at Dean with a strange face. He didn't expect that a sentinel inside the wall would become a sergeant in the blink of an eye. His rank was the same as his. After leaving the tent, Dean was led by a sergeant to put on his military uniform and go through the registration procedures. He knew that he had temporarily taken root on the God of War's wall and could personally participate in the war. Moreover, this time he wasn't a cannon fodder. If there wasn't a special emergency, he wouldn't personally go into battle. This was also convenient for him to observe the giant demon clan outside the borders. Chapter 1044. This is the camp of Commander Moss, and this is the camp of Commander Handro. The sergeant took Dean around Palena's brigade commander's camp. He introduced Dean to the residences and territories of the big shots, so that Dean wouldn't accidentally trespass and provoke trouble. The sergeant took Dean to a group of tents near the edge of War God's wall. This is the camp of Commander Fitch. I will take you to see him. Since the brigade commander didn't say which platoon commander you will be assigned to, it means that Commander Fitch has been assigned to you. He saw the puzzled look on Dean's face, so he explained, Commander Fitch is a close confidant of the brigade commander and is directly under her command. Don't look at Fitch's position as a platoon commander, but his status is higher than the other company commanders. Even the 8 commanders will be polite when they see him. So you can't act rashly and perform well. With your current rank, if your performance is good, you will soon become a deputy platoon commander here. Dean's face showed gratitude as he saw that the sergeant was serious. Thank you for telling me. May I ask your name? The soldier laughed. My name is Loon. I've said so much just to get on your good side. When you get promoted in the future, don't forget about me. I won't. Dean quickly said. He was a small character who had just entered the giant wall. After entering the camp surrounded by tents, Dean and Lewin soon saw an open space. Several burly figures were sitting inside and chatting. In the middle, there were 2 strong men who were arm wrestling on a metal platform. Both of their faces were red, and the veins on their foreheads were bulging. They were exerting all their strength. Bang! One of them couldn't hold on any longer. The back of his hand was pressed down. Ha, hurry up. Money. The man who won laughed. The man who lost was depressed. He was about to ask for money when he saw Dean and Lewin. He immediately shouted, Who are you? What are you doing here? The winning man also turned his head. He seemed to recognize Lewin. His eyes swept over Dean, who was next to Lewin. Then he turned his head and laughed at the losing man. Come on, they have nothing to do with you. Pay up. The corners of the burly man's mouth twitched slightly. He reluctantly took out a few gold coins from his pocket and tossed them to him. The strong man who won put away the gold coins with a smile and turned to look at Loon, who was approaching, and said with a smile, You're here for platoon leader Fit, right? This is? Newcomers, I've been assigned to you. Lewin chuckled. I won money again. I'll treat you tonight. Come on, this little bit of money is enough for me to have some fun. If anyone is going to treat, it should be you, Mr. Rich Boss. The man smiled and looked at Dudian. Hello, my name is Gully. What's your name? Ryan, please take care of me. Dudian smiled. Gully nodded slightly. Suddenly, He blinked his eyes and said, "Are you interested in playing?" Loon snapped, "I've just arrived and you want to bully me? If you like playing so much, why don't you find platoon leader fit to play? Who dares to play with a monster?" Ghoulie whispered and then shrugged his shoulders. "I'm just playing. How can it be called bullying me? Maybe I can't beat him. Come on." Loon couldn't help but roll his eyes. "Who doesn't know that your magic marks are power type? Why don't you compete with him in the long jump?" "It's okay, I'll play with him," Dudian said. Loon was kind enough to help him. He didn't want to help too much and make Ghoulie unhappy. "Good, you've got guts." Ghoulie laughed and gave a thumbs up to Dudian. 5 gold coins for 1 round. "How about it, brother?" "No problem." Dudian nodded. Loon saw that Dudian had agreed, so he couldn't persuade him anymore. He just looked helpless. The big man who had lost came over and looked up and down at Dudian's body. He shook his head. "Unlucky boy. This stupid dolly is cheap." From the point of view of figure, Dudian's body was well proportioned. His chest also had the outline of pectoral and abdominal muscles. But compared with Ghoulie's muscular body, Dudian looked thin and weak. At first glance, it was obvious that Dudian didn't have magic marks of the power type. "Come." Ghoulie put 5 gold coins on the metal table and stretched out his arm. Dudian also stretched out his arm and shook hands with him. The big man who had lost used the iron chain on the table to wrap their palms and wrists so that they wouldn't loosen during the arm wrestling. "What about your gold coins?" Ghoulie frowned as he saw that Dudian didn't seem to be ready to pay. Dudian smiled, revealing his snow-white teeth. "It's okay, I'll win." Ghoulie was stunned for a moment before bursting into laughter. Loon and the big man were dumbfounded. They didn't expect Dudian to be so confident. "Well, anyway, you are here. I'm not afraid that you will renege on your debt." Ghoulie didn't insist on Dudian to pay. 5 gold coins was just a small amount of money for Dudian's salary after he joined them. "Help me shout the start," Ghoulie said. The big man held their fists and shouted the start. Bang! The metal table slightly shook as Ghoulie's hand was pressed on the table. Loon and the burly man widened their eyes in shock. Ghoulie was also at a loss. He felt like he was in a dream. How could he fall down without exerting his strength? "Thank you." Dudian smiled and grabbed the 5 gold coins in front of Ghoulie. Ghoulie recovered and quickly said, "No, it doesn't count. How can it not count?" Before he could finish, the burly man who was watching the battle reacted and quickly interrupted him. "If this doesn't count, then what I did before doesn't count either." Ghoulie was speechless, but he knew that he was wrong. He was a bit depressed. "Well, I was careless. Let's go again. Once is enough." Loon immediately persuaded. Ghoulie was hesitant. If he continued to insist, then it would be a bit too much, and he would appear to be narrow-minded. He was holding a playful mentality and didn't have any malicious intention to bully Dudian. He wasn't stupid enough to offend others for no reason. "It's okay. I'm just playing." Dudian laughed. Ghoulie was relieved and grinned. "Brother Do is right. Brother Do is open-minded. But this time I won't be careless." Dudian smiled. The arm wrestling began again. When the burly man shouted, Ghoulie's hand once again touched the metal platform. He was somewhat dumbfounded, and then his rough face turned slightly red and hot. He had been careless twice in a row, and it was really difficult for him to say it out loud. Seeing this, Loon and the burly man laughed out loud without holding back. "Brother Do, I'm not ready," Ghoulie said in an embarrassed tone. Dudian laughed. "Then let's go again. But first, give me the money." Ghoulie was relieved. He took out 10 gold coins from his pocket and handed 5 to Dudian. He put another 5 gold coins on the table. "You can have these 5 if you win." "Okay," Dudian agreed. Ghoulie held his breath and clenched his teeth. When the burly man was about to shout start again, Ghoulie's palms bulged slightly, and he secretly exerted force. When the word start was heard, his arm muscles bulged. He was secretly happy. Finally, he used his strength. Bang! Just as the joy in his heart rose, the back of his hand suddenly knocked on the metal table. Ghoulie's mouth was slightly agape, and his eyes were a little dazed. "Ha ha ha!" The big man next to him laughed exaggeratedly. He held the metal table with one hand and covered his stomach with the other. Loon was surprised. He looked at Dudian and found that things were not so simple. Dudeen smiled and put away the 5 gold coins in front of Ghoulie. Then he pushed the 10 gold coins in front of him to Ghoulie. I'm not familiar with this place. Brother Ghoulie, if you're free tonight, would you like to invite me to have a meal? I'll give you the money for the meal. Ghoulie came back to his senses. He was embarrassed and puzzled, but he accepted Dudeen's goodwill. I lost. Brother Dean's magic marks should be agility type. It's too fast. Dean chuckled and didn't deny it. He gave the other a way out. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.